Chapter 1898. In the palace at the top of the mountain, the warlord sat on the main seat. He looked down at the people below with a pair of sharp eyes. Zhang Wuying knelt on one knee, looking pathetic. When the warlord's eyes landed on him, he couldn't help but tremble. The atmosphere in the palace was oppressive. It was almost suffocating. Summon Zhang Wukong. After a long while, the warlord's voice rang out. The tense atmosphere instantly dissipated. Soon, Zhang Wukong came to the palace and knelt down on one knee. Zhang Wukong, Zhang Wuying, listen up. The two of you attack with all your might and kill Chu Mu. The warlord gave the order. Previously, the warlord's order was to capture Chu Mu alive and kill him if it didn't work. This time, however, he had to kill him. He could feel the threat that Chu Mu posed. Perhaps to him, a first refinement realm cultivator was like an ant. He could kill him with a wave of his hand. However, Chu Mu's potential was too shocking. He couldn't give him more time to grow. Soon, Zhang Wukong and Zhang Wuying left the palace and the imperial palace. After finding out the approximate location of Chu Mu from Lord Jishu, they quickly headed towards Chu Mu's location. However, it would take some time. To be able to kill Zhang Wuming and Zhang Wushuang, 3 of the 5 divine generals are gone. The warlord's eyes flickered. The 5 divine generals were all cultivated by him. They had contributed greatly to him. Now that 3 of them were dead, his faction's power was greatly weakened. This was very disadvantageous for him. Therefore, the warlord's killing intent towards Chu Mu and Kong Lu was exploding. However, now wasn't the time for him to act. No matter what, he could be considered the leader of the imperial palace to a certain extent. He was powerful and had a high status. There were other reasons why he couldn't act rashly. Zhang Wukong and Zhang Wuying together can kill Chu Mu. As for Kong Lu, the warlord's eyes flickered. He seemed to be thinking and hesitating. After a long while, he said, "I'll let him live for a while." Astral winds formed into streams in the sky, flowing endlessly like a river. Each of the astral winds was as sharp as a knife, and their power was astonishing. They could easily break through a saint-level expert's vital aura shield and cause damage. However, at this very moment, there were 4 figures flying rapidly in the astral wind layer. When the astral wind blew on their bodies, they were directly blown away. These 4 people were extremely handsome. Their auras were noble and faintly discernible. They were like gods in the clouds, high and mighty. They were members of the celestial race, the peerless powerhouses of the celestial race, the celestial race's forbidden guard. According to Tianjizi's calculations, Chu Mu should be in the heavenly dragon domain. We must find him and kill him. The leader of the 4, Tian Daoji, said coldly. Captain, with the 4 of us attacking, that Chu Mu won't be able to escape even if he has 3 heads and 6 arms, one of the other 3 said. The other 2 nodded. For Chu Mu to be able to survive until now, it is undeniable that he is capable. Do not underestimate him. Tian Daoji said. Yes. The 3 of them hurriedly responded. Even so, the 3 of them still disagreed in their hearts. One must know that they were peerless powerhouses of the celestial race. Even though they were only at the first refinement, their bloodline was noble and their strength was tyrannical. It was obvious that they were stronger than the peerless powerhouses of the human race at the same level. From the moment they were born until now, their experiences had been to suppress the geniuses of the human race and other races. They had long nurtured the arrogance in their hearts. That kind of high and mighty attitude of looking down on others could not be changed so easily. Moreover, he was just a junior of the human race. Even if his talent was not bad, he would not be placed in their eyes. The captain naturally saw through the 3's thoughts. However, as a member of the celestial race and a peerless powerhouse of the second refinement, he also felt that Chu Mu was courted death by them. There was no chance for him to escape. The reason why he said that was only because he had more experience and was relatively more cautious. That was all. In a more deserted area of the Sky Dragon mountain range, there was a cave that had just been excavated. Layers of seals had been set up to conceal all auras, and the entrance of the cave was hidden. Chu Mu was sitting in the depths of the cave. With a wave of his hand, a row of blood-red egg-sized beads appeared. There were a total of 30 of them. These were the blood essence pills. Every blood essence pill came from a powerful beast, spiritual beast or strange beast. Every beast was at the peak of the 9-star saint level. Their strength was far stronger than ordinary 9-star saints. They were at least at the dark star level, and the stronger ones were even at the bright sun level. It wasn't that there weren't any peerless powerhouse-level beasts in the Sky Dragon mountain range. There were, and there was more than one. However, Chu Mu didn't touch them. That was because the peerless powerhouse-level beasts were intelligent. Their strength was terrifying. It was almost equivalent to the combination of the Way of Yuan Li and the Way of the Sage Body. Their battle strength was shocking. Even if he could win, it would be a tough battle. Moreover, although the blood refinement evil art was shocking, Chu Mu was only a beginner. It was too difficult to refine a peerless powerhouse-level beast with his peak 9th level blood essence pill. There was an 80 to 90% chance that he would fail. Finally, it was because of Chu Mu's own body. With his peak 9th level sage body, taking the blood essence pill of the peerless powerhouse level would be too much for him to bear. 30 blood essence pills are completely enough for me to completely refine my sage body to the peak of the 9th level. Perhaps there will still be some left, Chu Mu thought. Opening his mouth, a blood essence pill flew into Chu Mu's mouth. He swallowed it directly. The power contained in the blood essence pill immediately spread in his abdomen. It was like a volcanic eruption, rushing to his limbs and bones. His chi and blood seemed to be ignited. It was as if they were on fire, surging endlessly like a tide, rushing to every part of his body. Refine. With a low shout, layers of blood-red ripples spread out in all directions. As the power surged, the blood essence in his body suddenly accelerated, driving the power of the blood essence pill and merging it into his own blood essence. Gradually, as Chu Mu refined the blood essence pill, more and more golden color appeared in his blood. When the blood completely turned golden, it was the time when the blood in his body transformed into blood essence. However, that wasn't the limit. It was returning to its original state, turning back into a pure and perfect blood-red color. That was the true limit. The golden color in his blood continued to increase. After a while, the power of the blood essence pill was refined. Chu Mu opened his mouth and swallowed the second blood essence pill, refining it again. Kong Lu, you actually want to become enemies with the Imperial Court? Lei Ba's eyes widened, filled with disbelief. Do you still remember Chu Mu? Kong Lu asked. Chu Mu? Lei Ba thought for a moment. Are you talking about the junior in the heavenly ancient divine emperor's remains? That's right. Now, he already has the strength of a peerless expert. He was chased by the Imperial Court and I happened to meet him. I helped him and the Imperial Court saw me as a thorn in their side, wanting to get rid of me. Kong Lu explained the matter clearly in a few words. Lei Ba felt as if he was listening to a heavenly book. He didn't see it with his own eyes. It was really hard for him to believe. However, he also knew that his good friend Kong Lu wouldn't joke about such things. In other words, it was all true. I can't imagine that the junior from back then has grown to such an extent. It has only been a few decades. Lei Ba smiled bitterly, as if he had suffered a great blow. Now is not the time to be emotional. Back then, you were also suppressed by the Imperial Court and had no choice but to submit. However, you still haven't let go of this matter. Kong Lu said directly, you should know that this has become a shadow in your heart, restricting your growth. If this goes on, it might develop into a heart demon. Lei Ba's expression changed. This was a scar in his heart and now, it was viciously reopened by Kong Lu. The humiliation of the past made Lei Ba furious. The aura around him surged and lightning flashed in the sky. It was really terrifying. In the past, there wasn't a suitable opportunity. But this time, it is the best opportunity. Kong Lu's expression was calm. He stared at Lei Ba and continued, Chu Mu has great luck and his achievements will definitely be extraordinary. I believe that the Imperial Court won't be able to gain anything from being enemies with him. Lei Ba's expression kept changing. All of a sudden, he was hesitant. However, he wasn't a decisive person like Kong Lu. Okay, I will go crazy with you this time, Lei Ba said fiercely. That's right. Kong Lu smiled. Apart from you, there are a few other good friends who have suffered at the hands of the Imperial Court. Kong Lu was a good person and had many connections, hence he had some good friends. Coincidentally, they had all suffered at the hands of the Imperial Court. Then, let's go. Lei Ba smiled. Since he had made his decision, he wouldn't hesitate anymore. Since he had decided to be enemies with the Imperial Court, then the stronger he was, the better. After all, the Imperial Court was an extremely strong existence. Chu Mu's aura is in this direction. The Divine Guard captain took out a compass. After making some calculations, the compass needle pointed to a direction. His eyes immediately lit up and he quickly flew towards Chu Mu with his 3 subordinates. That was the temporary cave Chu Mu had opened up in Heavenly Dragon Mountain Range. Refine, refine, refine. There was more and more gold in the blood while the red became less and less. In the end, the red turned into gold. His blood had all turned into essence blood. The golden color rippled and a powerful energy surged, filling his entire body. Not enough, still not enough. I haven't reached the true limit. Continue to refine. He took another essence blood pill. This time, he took 3. An even more powerful energy rushed through the essence blood. It seemed to go berserk and wanted to destroy Chu Mu's essence blood. However, the blood essence contained a powerful force that constantly dissolved the impact, absorbing and refining it into the blood essence. It constantly strengthened the power contained in the blood essence, making it more and more powerful and vigorous. Under the essence blood, Chu Mu's saint body was also strengthened. At the same time, the 4 divine guards approached. My novel, Lone God of the Sword, will have more new content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now and click the plus sign on the top right to add friend. Search for the public account Kdred and follow. Hurry! Chapter 1899. Above the atmosphere, the 4 figures flying at high speed suddenly stop. Their deep gazes pierced through time and space, looking down at the earth and mountains. According to the compass, Chu Mu's aura is here. Team leader Tian Daoji said, find him. Although the compass had pointed out Chu Mu's aura, it was not 100% accurate. It could only determine a rough area, and they still needed to search carefully. However, they all knew about Chu Mu's aura. Therefore, as long as the area was determined, it was not difficult to find him. The spiritual energy of the 4 peerless powerhouses of the Sky Clan spread out, covering a radius of tens of thousands of meters. Everything was sensed and grasped by them. It was like a carpet, not a single detail was missed. After a few breaths, they sensed a hidden cave at almost the same time. That cave was covered with seals. It might be able to hide from saint-level elites, but it was nothing to the divine forbidden guards of the divine clan. Attack, beat him out, Tian Daoji ordered. He pointed his finger lightly in the air, and a strong milky white light shot out. The other 3 people also attacked. In an instant, the cave was pierced, shattered, and collapsed. With a boom, an extremely sharp sword light, as if the heavens were worshipping it, suddenly shot out from the collapsed cave. Its speed was indescribable. Fast, it was really too fast. Even Tian Daoji, a second refinement peerless master, could only catch it. The sword light was already very close. The three first refinement peerless masters under him naturally did not react as fast as him. "Get out of the way!" Tian Daoji was shocked and angry. He hurriedly waved his hand, and a huge milky white palm fell from the sky, carrying with it a shocking destructive intent. With a boom, the sword light shattered under the huge palm. However, before Tian Daoji could breathe a sigh of relief, a scream rang in his ears. It was unknown where it came from, but after the sword light reformed, it shot into the sky and pierced through the body of a guard. It tore the guard apart from the guard, and the guard's origin soul was torn apart as well. The guard died completely. In a single exchange, before they could even see the figure of the person, one of the four had already died, and it was a complete death. Otherwise, if they had left behind their primordial spirit, they would have been able to bring it back to the Tian clan and have a chance to rebuild their bodies. The sword light was none other than Chu Mu. The moment the cave was attacked, he sensed it and reacted immediately. He exploded with all his speed and killed one of them in one fell swoop. After the sword light pierced through a celestial expert, it did not stop at all and continued upwards. Its remaining might burst forth as it turned into three shocking rays of sword light that slashed down towards the other three celestial guards. Then, without any obstruction, it quickly shot off in a certain direction. Of the four peerless experts of the Tian clan, 3 were at the first refinement and 1 was at the second refinement. He was not afraid of the 3 at the first refinement, but the one at the second refinement was not easy to deal with. However, in a single exchange, Chu Mu had caught them off guard and killed one of the first refinement experts. Then, he shot out 3 sword light to kill him. The second refinement expert was naturally not afraid, but the other 2 at the first refinement needed to take action to defend against it. This bought him some time to escape. After Tian Daoji and the other 2 celestial guards dodged the sword light, their expressions became extremely ugly. They were so gloomy that it seemed as if water was about to drip out of them. Right under their noses, the person they regarded as prey had turned around and killed one of them. This was a humiliation, a ruthless humiliation. For the arrogant people of the Tian clan, this was an unimaginable humiliation. Compared to the death of their fellow clansmen, their pride was more important. "Chase!" Tian Daoji shouted in a low voice. His voice was filled with boundless killing intent. The 3 of them immediately burst forth with their fastest speed and chased in the direction Chu Mu left in. Tian Daoji was at the second refinement, so his speed was the fastest. The other 2 were at the first refinement, so their speed was not as fast as Tian Daoji's. However, they worked together and resonated with each other in a mysterious way, causing their speed to increase to a certain extent. They were close to the limit of the first refinement. Even so, they were still behind Tian Daoji and were gradually being pulled apart. The speed of a second refinement expert was very, very fast. Moreover, they were from the Tian clan. Their innate bloodline was superior, so their speed was naturally faster. Chu Mu exploded with all his speed and barely reached the level of a second refinement expert. However, he still could not compare to Tian Daoji. The distance between them was gradually being pulled apart. Inside the cave, Chu Mu had refined 20 blood essence pills. All the blood in his body had completely transformed into blood essence. Then, he continued to refine it and returned it to its original state. He had reached the true limit. Out of the 30 blood essence pills, there were still 10 pills left. Although these 10 pills could not improve his divine body, they could be used to recover the blood essence that his divine body had consumed. Unfortunately, just like origin energy, the divine body needed a corresponding technique to transform into a spiritual body. Moreover, it was directly related to the power of the laws. Chu Mu did not have any laws or techniques, so naturally, he could not transform his divine body into a spiritual body. This might take a long time to slowly comprehend in the future. He could not do it now. However, after his divine body reached the peak of level 9, His strength had indeed increased significantly. He felt that his strength had reached the peak of the first refinement. If he had a period of time and completely mastered the explosive increase in strength, it was very likely that he would reach the peak of the first refinement and be half a step into the second refinement. However, that was a matter for the future. The most important thing now was to get rid of the pursuers behind him. However, Chu Mu could feel that the other party was gradually closing in on him. The murderous intent was not concealed at all. There was a determination to kill him even if he had to go to the ends of the earth. Chu Mu, you dare to kill my divine prohibition guards. No matter where you go, no one can save you. Tian Dao Ji chased while his voice was wrapped in murderous intent. When it entered Chu Mu's ears, it made his hair stand on end. Chu Mu did not respond. He continued to fly at high speed while thinking of a way to escape. Ever since he had been discovered after returning to the deep blue world, Chu Mu had been pursued. However, he had turned danger into safety time and time again. In the end, he had killed the other party. Time and time again, this had built up Chu Mu's confidence and unwavering determination. As long as it was not the final moment, nothing could be concluded. Tian Dao Ji chased while constantly threatening Chu Mu with monstrous murderous intent. If a person's will was not firm enough, under the threat of Tian Dao Ji's murderous intent, they would probably waver and affect themselves. However, Chu Mu's will was incomparably firm. He did not waver in the slightest. As if he did not hear anything, he maintained his original speed and advanced. My divine race is the sky of the deep blue world. No race dares to offend my divine race. If the heavens want you to die, you must die. Tian Dao Ji was about to go crazy. My life is in my hands, not the heavens. Moreover, a mere divine race is not enough to represent the heavens. Chu Mu sneered in his heart and secretly said, the people of the divine race had always been arrogant. For a long time, they had cultivated their arrogant character. They thought that they were the heavens, the descendants of the divine race. Everything they did was to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. In Chu Mu's eyes, it was just a joke. Heavenly Tao. How profound and unfathomable was the heavenly Tao. How could a mere divine race replace it? However, that was another matter. Right now, the most important thing was to escape from the other party's pursuit. Two streams of light flew across the sky. Tian Dao Ji was getting closer and closer. His murderous intent was constantly attacking, but the other two divine race people were gradually being pulled further and further away. Chu Mu, you can't escape. Tian Dao Ji said again. He was also very determined. He tried to use his murderous intent and words to shake Chu Mu's will again and again. They're getting closer and closer. Chu Mu secretly said, it seems that it's very difficult to escape. Since that's the case, I can only use my secret technique. It was just one person catching up. With his current strength, it was still difficult for him to fight against the second refinement. However, his speed had not reached the limit. He could still be faster. Blood prison burning the heavens. With a low roar, Chu Mu's blood essence immediately fluctuated. The temperature rapidly rose. A terrifying high temperature spread around his body, burning all the aura around him. Even the void began to distort. Blood prison burning the heavens was the secret technique that Sun Jin had used previously. It increased his strength by 10 times. However, the blood essence that Sun Jin burned belonged to the spirit body level. Chu Mu's blood essence was only the blood essence of the sacred body level. The difference between the two was very big. Therefore, with the same 30% of his blood essence burning, Chu Mu's strength did not increase by 10 times. However, it was still 7 or 8 times. The 7 or 8 times increase in strength also doubled Chu Mu's speed. The originally golden sword light was dyed with a layer of blood. It burned like a flame. Wherever it passed, the void seemed to be ignited and burned. The increase in speed by several times allowed Chu Mu's speed to exceed the limit. He reached the second refinement level, which was even faster than Tian Daoji. The distance between them, which was constantly closing, began to widen. It can still be increased. Tian Daoji's eyes widened in shock. The other party's aura was at the first refinement level. His speed had barely reached the second refinement level, which already shocked him. Now it had increased again and truly reached the second refinement level. It was even above him. You can't escape. You definitely can't escape. Tian Daoji roared angrily as he watched Chu Mu's figure disappear into the distance. Tian Daoji! He slapped his chest with both hands. With a tremor, the power in his body became violent and surrounded his body. An abnormal dark red color surged on his face. Secret technique, a secret technique of the Tian clan. His speed instantly doubled, causing him to speed up even more. He caught up and once again closed the distance between him and Chu Mu. The two of them exploded and their speed became even faster. They had already left the other two Tian clan people far behind. They could only follow the aura left behind to catch up. The two of them also believed that with their captain's strength, even if they could not catch up for a while, they would not be at a disadvantage. After all, the difference between the second refinement and the first refinement was still very obvious. My novel Lone God of the Way of the Sword will have more new content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click on the plus sign at the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred and follow. Hurry up! Chapter 1900. According to the news, Chu Mu's route should be heading in this direction. Yu Daosheng stood high up in the sky in the atmosphere. His eyes shone brightly as he stared ahead, patiently waiting for Chu Mu to appear. The deep blue world was vast, and there were many people who specialized in the Tao of divination. These people usually came from large factions, such as the Imperial Court or the Wind Whispering Tower. As long as they paid a certain price, they might be able to calculate a person's location. Yu Daosheng knew that Chu Mu would pass by this route, so he had set up an ambush here in advance. However, quite some time had passed, and Chu Mu still hadn't appeared. Yu Daosheng's expression couldn't help but become gloomy. Although the Tao of divination was exquisite, it wasn't 100% accurate. In this world, other than the deceased Heaven Ancient Divine Emperor, Tian Jizi of the Divine Clan was the strongest in the Tao of divination. Those from other clans who specialized in the Tao of divination were often inferior to Tian Jizi of the Divine Clan. Therefore, it was understandable that the divination was wrong. However, if the divination was wrong, he would undoubtedly waste some time. This bit of time was nothing to him. The main thing was that if he missed the chance to meet Chu Mu, he wouldn't know where to find him next time. The deep blue world was vast, and peerless experts weren't omnipotent. He had to take revenge for threatening Yi Daozi. After waiting for many days without any results, Yu Daosheng began to doubt the accuracy of his divination. He hesitated whether to continue waiting or leave. At this time, he felt two strong auras coming from afar, one in front and one behind. The aura in front had a monstrous blood heat and a shocking sharpness. The aura in the back had a noble and otherworldly aura, but it contained a shocking killing intent. Yu Daosheng didn't recognize the aura in front. He had never felt it before, but he could tell that the aura in the back was the aura unique to the Divine Clan. He could tell that a peerless expert from the Divine Clan was chasing after the person in front. Chu Mu. Yu Daosheng's eyes lit up. His body moved and he quickly flew towards the two auras in the astral wind layer. According to his divination, Chu Mu should be coming in his direction, but now he was not. Fortunately, he was not too far away so he could still feel his aura. Otherwise, he would have missed him. Since he had sensed it, Chu Mu was doomed. Yu Daosheng tried his best to hide his aura and quickly flew through the astral wind layer, rapidly approaching Chu Mu. Chu Mu's six senses had always been sharp. Although he did not sense Yu Daosheng's aura approaching him, a sense of crisis arose in his heart, as if there was still danger lurking around. Other than the Tian clan, is there anyone else? Chu Mu thought. His divine soul swept past, but he did not feel anything. How sharp! The hidden Yu Daosheng's expression changed slightly. He never thought that even though he had tried his best to hide his aura, he would still be discovered by the other party. The blood prison burning the heavens that was unleashed with 30% of his blood essence was mainly an increase in strength. As for the increase in speed, it was not as obvious as the increase in strength. Currently, Chu Mu had already flown an extremely far distance, almost flying out of the Heavenly Dragon region's territory. The Heavenly Tao was in hot pursuit, and his hatred for Chu Mu could not be washed away even with all the water in the blue sea. Under the Heaven Secret technique, the speed of the Heavenly Tao doubled, and it was even faster than Chu Mu by a bit. The distance between the two was still closing. Seeing this scene, Yu Daosheng's eyes lit up. Immediately, a tyrannical aura erupted from his body. The sky changed. A huge white and a huge black appeared out of thin air, spinning like a huge millstone. The terrifying aura seemed to want to crush the earth. The sudden change caused Chu Mu to be greatly alarmed. A strong sense of danger swept over him, causing his hair to stand on end. The black and white wheels. He knew that this was the attack of a peerless expert from the black-white round palace. Idaozi's saint body had already been destroyed by him, leaving behind a primordial spirit to escape. It was impossible for him to recover so quickly. Moreover, the power emitted by this black and white wheel was clearly above the first refining level of Idaozi. Without a doubt, the person who attacked was the second refining peerless expert of the black-white round palace. There were pursuers behind, and there were strong enemies in front. Chu Mu was attacked from both sides, and for a time, he was in a dangerous situation. The black and white wheel fell from the sky, suppressing the heavens and shattering the earth. An incomparably terrifying aura struck Chu Mu's body. That kind of pressure caused Chu Mu's body to tremble. The blood-red light flickered, as if it was about to be extinguished. Chu Mu's speed was also hindered and directly decreased. But Tian Daoji, who was chasing behind him, was not affected at all. In an instant, he closed the distance between him and Chu Mu. He stretched out a finger, crystal clear, and turned into a giant finger like a sword, piercing towards Chu Mu. The giant finger was milky white and exuded a noble and holy aura. But when it touched down, the void collapsed, and it carried with it an astonishing will of destruction. It was a pincer attack. Taking a deep breath, Chu Mu knew that this time, there was no way to avoid it. Since I can't avoid it, then let's fight. With a low shout, he mobilized all of his power. The power of the Sword God Descend's secret technique was also activated in an instant. The sharpness of the sword was increased tenfold, and the sword domain change was activated. The power of the two swords was increased again, to the extreme, by 5 times. The sword domain change increased the power of the sword by 5 times, the blood prison burns the heavens by 7 times, and the Sword God Descend's secret technique by 10 times. In total, it was an increase of 22 times. The power of the metal spirit emerged, and traces of gold were injected into the two swords. Suddenly, the sharpness of the two swords was increased again. The two swords crossed, and the sword light was incomparably bright, like a brand engraved in the space. Sword form, heaven and earth cross /. This was the most powerful attack that Chu Mu could unleash after he gathered all of his power. It was enough to instantly kill a peak first refinement expert and threaten a second refinement expert. However, the giant black wheel and the giant white wheel were the ultimate moves of Yu Daosheng, a beginner second refinement expert. Its power was extremely strong, far surpassing that of a first refinement expert. The giant black wheel and the giant white wheel came crashing down from the sky. The incomparably bright heaven and earth cross / sword light went against the flow, and the two instantly collided. Behind Chu Mu, the extreme point of the heaven's finger, the milky white giant finger that carried a sense of holiness and destruction, was also closing in rapidly. The terrifying aura made Chu Mu's hair stand on end. An obscure sound rang out continuously. It was the sound of the heaven and earth cross sword light colliding with the giant black and white wheel. Sparks flew everywhere, but Chu Mu did not dare to stop at all, because the giant finger behind him was closing in rapidly. The powerful aura it gave him was even stronger and more dangerous than the giant black and white wheel. Cutting path. As it closed in, Chu Mu attacked again. Both of his swords exploded continuously, and streaks of sword light that could cut through the void wreaked havoc. The giant black and white wheel was powerful, but it could not shatter the sword light of the heaven and earth cross slash. It could only crush it bit by bit. Under such circumstances, Chu Mu's cutting path sword form, which was more than 20 times stronger, immediately broke open the giant black and white wheel, tearing a crack in it. Seizing the fleeting crack, Chu Mu transformed into a sword light and entered it, coming out from behind the giant black and white wheel. At the same time, the giant milky white finger fell and hit the giant black and white wheel. The heaven and earth cross sword light collapsed in an instant, and the giant milky white finger hit the giant black and white wheel. The already damaged giant black and white wheel suddenly trembled, and cracks spread all over it. The giant milky white finger also trembled, and its speed was restrained. Yu Daosheng's sneak attack had allowed Ji Tian to seize the opportunity to attack. He thought that he could keep Chu Mu here, but he never imagined that he would be used by Chu Mu to win himself a chance to escape. The two of them were shocked and angry. The giant black and white wheel shattered, and Yu Daosheng immediately chased after Chu Mu. The giant milky white finger also dissipated in the air. Ji Tian's complexion became even uglier, as if he had been played for a fool. "Your Excellency from the Celestials, let's join hands and kill Chu Mu." Yu Daosheng chased after him as he sent a sound transmission to Ji Tian. "Your Excellency from the Black and White Round Palace, do your best to block Chu Mu and slow him down. I will attack and kill him in one fell swoop." Ji Tian took a deep breath and replied. "All right." Yu Daosheng replied. He attacked once more. His eyes blinked, and his pupils rapidly changed. One eye turned white and the other black, as if two giant black and white wheels had appeared. His aura also underwent an obvious change, as if he was in harmony with the world. On his left was a white aura, and on his right was a black aura. Black and white limitless. Yu Daosheng's tone became extremely cold and emotionless. He waved his hands, one black and the other white. It was as if he was holding up two suns. The black and white colors appeared in the sky, and an astonishing might descended from the sky. Suddenly, a strange change occurred in the sky. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, countless white and black auras intertwined and finally converged into a circle. It was like an incomparably huge wheel, with one side white and the other black. Turn. The giant black and white wheel was like a wheel. Under Yu Daosheng's command, it slowly began to turn. A rumbling sound rang out, as if 10,000 thunderbolts were rumbling, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were galloping endlessly. An incomparably terrifying aura descended from the sky, suppressing down from the sky. The space under the giant black and white wheel seemed to be imprisoned, as if an invisible mountain was pressing down on it. Chu Mu, who was flying at high speed, was directly impacted by the black and white limitless. His speed suddenly dropped, and he almost stopped in the sky. That terrifying suppression was unbearable for him. Powerful, it was simply too powerful. Good chance you're going to die. Tian Daoji's eyes lit up. He suddenly opened his arms, as if he wanted to embrace the world. His holy aura became more and more intense. Then, it turned into a shocking milky white beam of light, shooting into the sky. The wind and clouds surged, and a white vortex appeared like an inverted funnel. The chi of heaven and earth surged wildly, turning into dragons that gathered together. tens of thousands of dragons roared, and the sky and earth turned upside down. Tian Daoji's aura seemed to merge with the sky. Yu Daoxing's eyes flashed with fear, as if he knew what kind of ultimate move Tian Daoji was about to use. The divine clan claimed to be the descendants of the gods, representing the heavens, and enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. This move is called heavenly judgment. I'll send you on your way. Tian Daoji's eyes were cold and emotionless, as indifferent as the heavens. My novel, The Lone God of the Sword, will have more new content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred and follow. Hurry! Chapter 1901. At this moment, the various forces in the world became extremely chaotic and violent. Endless chi of heaven and earth gathered from all directions. Countless bolts of lightning shuttled through it. The wind howled and the lightning flashed. Wind and thunder intertwined. The incomparably huge inverted funnel-shaped vortex spun rapidly, emitting an extremely frightening aura that shook the heavens and the earth. Tian Daoji's eyes were cold and emotionless, as if they represented the heavenly Tao. The huge black and white wheel was also affected by this incomparably violent inverted funnel-shaped vortex and gradually broke apart. The suppression that Chu Mu was under instantly dissipated, but the pressure produced by the inverted funnel-shaped vortex seemed to be even stronger. The endless chi of heaven and earth was like knives and swords. The knives and swords cut through Chu Mu as if they wanted to cut him into pieces, but they could do nothing to him. Under the terrifying pressure, Chu Mu raised his head to look at the sky. His eyes lit up, and there seemed to be sword light flashing in the depths of his pupils. He stared at the inverted funnel-shaped vortex in the sky with boundless sharpness. He could clearly feel that an extremely frightening aura was being nurtured in the depths of that inverted funnel-shaped vortex. It quickly condensed and locked onto him, giving him a feeling that he would not be able to escape no matter where he went. An intuition told Chu Mu that it was not just a feeling. He was really locked onto and unable to escape. In the face of such a powerful force, Yu Daoxing was afraid of being affected and had already retreated far away. The black and white infinity had also dissipated quickly because he had given up. Otherwise, he could have continued to persevere, but the price he had to pay was that he would be injured. His expression was solemn as he looked at the indifferent Ji Tian Dao with fear and trepidation in his eyes. "Since I can't escape, I'll cut you into pieces." Taking a deep breath, the sword light in the depths of his eyes shone brightly. With the eternal spiritual sword and the silver light spiritual sword in his hands, the sword light became dazzling. Heaven unleashes its murderous intent. Earth surges with murderous tribulation. With a silent chant, endless violent yuan qi of heaven and earth gushed out. Waves of power also spread out from the ground, pouring in from the top of his head and from the bottom of his feet. With his body as the carrier, the sky and the earth met. The two forces collided and intertwined in his body. Then, together with Chu Mu's own power, they poured into the two swords in his hands. "Is this your final struggle? If the heavens want you to die, you must die." Heavenly Tao Judgment. Ji Tian Dao raised his hand and pointed it at the huge inverted funnel-shaped vortex in the sky. At this moment, the vortex was tainted with traces of gray aura. That gray aura was filled with destruction, capable of destroying the world and all things. There was nothing it could not destroy. The moment his voice fell, Tian Daoji raised his hand and pointed forward, pointing at Chu Mu. At the same time, a milky white hand stretched out from the huge funnel-shaped vortex. It was crystal clear like a perfect work of art. However, traces of gray aura circled around the finger, forming lines on it. Heavenly Tao Judgment. It was an extremely powerful secret technique of the Tian clan. Only peerless experts could cultivate it. The heavenly Tao judgment used by different Tian clan members was different in form, but they all had one thing in common. It was that their power was extremely tyrannical and incomparably shocking, as if it represented the power of the heavenly Tao. Once struck by the heavenly Tao judgment, one would definitely suffer an extremely obvious injury. Even one's soul would be injured to the point of shattering. Normally, the peerless experts of the Tian clan would not use this move, because using such an ultimate move would be a huge burden to them. But now, in order to kill Chu-Mu, Tian Dao-ji had no choice but to use this move. He also firmly believed that under this move, Chu-Mu would definitely die. Even his soul would completely disappear. There would no longer be any traces of his existence between heaven and earth. The milky white finger pointed down in the air, pressing down on Chu-Mu, as if it wanted to crush Chu-Mu to death like an ant. Heavenly slaughter. Earthly calamity. Chu-Mu's eyes shot out sword light. He raised his two swords and slashed down. The two-sword light that carried the power of the heavens and the earth, as well as all of his strength, moved in the same trajectory, one after the other, as they both slashed towards the milky white finger. Under the two-sword light, the space was directly cut open, as if the edge of a blade had cut through a piece of white paper. Yu Daosheng's body trembled, and his expression changed. These two-sword light made him feel fearful. These two swords were enough to threaten him. If he faced them head-on, if he was not careful, he could be killed. Only at the first refinement, but he had the strength to kill an early second refinement. This kind of strength was truly terrifying. This kind of talent was truly frightening. He must die. Yu Daosheng clenched his fist. Now, the relationship between him and Chu-Mu was like fire and water. If Chu-Mu did not die, the black-white round palace would definitely face a calamity in the future. He only hoped that Tian Dao-ji's heavenly Tao judgment would be able to kill him. Just as Yu Daosheng had this thought, the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword style and heavenly Tao judgment collided. Both stopped in the void, and one breath seemed to last forever. Break! Tian Dao-ji's cold and emotionless eyes stared. The two-sword light trembled. Under heavenly Tao judgment's finger, the first crack appeared, followed by the second and third. In the blink of an eye, countless cracks covered the two-sword light. With a press of the finger, the two-sword light instantly shattered, turning into countless sword light that shot in all directions. Each sword light cut open the void, like a black spider web entrenched in the void. The milky white finger was obstructed, and its speed was reduced. Even though it had shattered the two-sword light, the two-sword light had also left behind a slash mark on the finger. It had also dispersed much of the gray aura on the finger, causing the fingerprints on the finger to become blurry, and its power was greatly reduced. Chu-Mu could not escape because he was locked in place. He could only take it head-on. Now that he had used the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword style once, his body could withstand it once, and it had not reached its limit. However, he could not use it a second time, nor did he have the time to do so. Heavenly Cross Slash. The heavenly cross sword light pierced through the air and struck the finger, but it also dissipated in an instant. After his first attack failed, Chu-Mu continued to explode, and the heavenly cross sword light struck again and again. Another 3 heavenly cross slashes were unleashed, and all of them struck the milky white finger, leaving a cross-shaped sword mark. The speed of the finger was once again obstructed, and the gray aura on it dissipated a little. Its power was further reduced, but it still landed. 6 paths sword style. 6 pitch-black vortexes were arranged in a straight line, and a powerful suction force emerged. With a press of the finger, the first pitch-black vortex was destroyed, and then the second one was destroyed. The 6 pitch-black vortexes were all destroyed by the finger, and it was pointed at Chu-Mu's body. The 2 swords were crossed in front of him, and his power was completely unleashed. Even Chu-Mu used the eternal sword intent. The destructive power of the annihilation sword intent was stronger, but in terms of defense, the eternal sword intent was the best. Under such circumstances, Chu Mu had no choice but to risk using the eternal sword intent. As expected, once the eternal sword intent was used, the annihilation sword intent that was about to take shape immediately fluctuated, showing signs of collapsing. However, in the current situation, he could not care less. An indescribable power instantly bombarded the two crossed swords. The two swords bent inwards, and all the power on the swords vibrated in that instant, as if they were about to shatter. Under the pressure, the space around Chu Mu immediately collapsed. Cracks spread out, and strands of blackness swam around. The finger kept pressing downwards, and Chu Mu's swords were bent close to his chest. His sternum was almost broken, and his internal organs were trembling. His essence and blood were in a frenzy, and his whole body was pressed downwards. The space behind him collapsed, and more cracks appeared, becoming thicker and thicker. The power on the two swords was gradually broken down, and the pressure was increasing. With a bang, the space behind Chu Mu collapsed to the extreme, and finally shattered. With a thought, Chu Mu tried his best to use the art of dispersing force, directing the power to bombard the space behind him, and making it shatter faster. The power of the finger was too strong, and Chu Mu knew that he was no match for it. If this continued, he would most likely be killed here, which was not the result he wanted. Therefore, he could only shatter the space behind him, escape into it, and rely on luck to decide whether he lived or died. With a cracking sound, the space behind him completely shattered, turning into a human-sized black hole. Chu Mu immediately retreated, shrinking into it. The milky white finger also pointed into the black hole. Then, the finger trembled, and cracks appeared all over the finger, and it shattered. Inside the black hole was spatial turbulence, and its power was shocking. The finger was attacked by Chu Mu again and again, and it was weakened continuously. In the end, it resisted Chu Mu, and its power was weakened again. However, it still chased into the spatial crack, and finally collapsed. The human-sized black hole emitted an incomparably shocking aura, as if it could devour everything. Chu Mu's figure had already disappeared. Yu Daosheng looked at the black hole with a face full of fear. He unconsciously retreated a little, as if this was the safest way. With the finger shattered, Tian Daoji also came out of that state. His body trembled, and his eyes were filled with exhaustion. His face was pale, and he looked like he had overused his power and injured himself. His body swayed, and it seemed like he could not maintain his flying posture, and would fall at any time. He hurriedly took out an elixir, and quickly adjusted himself, so that he did not fall. With the heavenly judgment that he used at the early stage of the second refining, its power was terrifying. Could even kill someone at the middle stage of the second refining, and it could even threaten someone at the advanced stage of the second refining. Such a huge increase naturally came with a heavy price. He had used up all his power and his source was injured. It would probably take a few years for him to recover. However, it was worth it. Even though he did not personally see Chu Mu being strangled alive, he saw him fall into the black hole. Even the heavenly judgment could not withstand its power. One could imagine that Chu Mu would die without a doubt, and everything would be reduced to nothing. To be able to kill Chu Mu and remove a future strong enemy for the divine race, not to mention a little bit of damage to his source, even if most of it was damaged, it would be worth it. When he returned, the elders of the race would not treat him unfairly. On the contrary, he would definitely be rewarded. Not only would he be able to recover his damaged source in a short period of time, but he would also be able to become stronger, and his own strength would increase. Peerless powerhouse of the black-white round palace, you have helped. I will report this to the elders. When the time comes, the divine race will reward the black-white round palace. Go back and wait for the news. After Tian Daoji recovered a little, he looked at Yu Daosheng and said lightly. His superior attitude was so obvious. The novel Lone God of the Way of the Sword will have more new content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there is a 100% chance of a lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred, and follow. Hurry! Chapter 1902. Cloudsoar City floated thousands of meters high in the sky, surrounded by countless white cloud. It was like a fairyland. At the Tianji Tower, the Tianji Formation was activated, covering the entire area. Tianji Z stood at the top of the tower, receiving the support of the Tianji Formation as he divined again. In Tianji Z's eyes, the world changed. Countless figures flashed by, and finally fixed on Chu Mu's figure. A black torrent appeared from nothingness and rushed forward, drowning Chu Mu's figure, taking it away and disappearing into nothingness. That black torrent had an unfathomable power. Tianji Z's eyes trembled, and all the scenes collapsed. Dark red blood with traces of noble gold seeped out from the corner of his eyes. He quickly closed his eyes and stopped the divining. Tianji Z's body swayed, and he took a few steps back before stabilizing himself. He wiped the blood from the corner of his eyes, his face pale. Although the divining just now had a result, he also suffered some backlash. Fortunately, he had the support of the Tianji Formation. Otherwise, he would have been seriously injured, if not dead. He didn't know how many years it would take to recover. This is worth it. Chu Mu falling into the spatial black hole is real. He's dead for sure. Tian Jizi spoke with complete confidence. Very swiftly, this news spread to the ears of the elders of the celestial race. They were all extremely happy. And because of this, Tian Daoji also received a great reward. His origin injuries were quickly healed, and he also obtained a great opportunity. His strength would surely rise within a short period of time. Two figures flew at high speed, bringing with them layers of air waves as they tore through the sky. They quickly entered the Sky Dragon domain. They were the 5 heavenly generals, Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing, who were sent by the warlord to kill Chu Mu. They were both second refinement experts. They didn't know that Chu Mu had fallen into the spatial black hole. Golden sand covered the ground. Under the sunlight, it shone with a dazzling light, as if there were countless grains of golden sand. The sun was setting in the west, and the afterglow of the setting sun sprinkled down. The blue sea was sparkling, and when the wind blew, it brought along tiny waves that overlapped with each other, making countless soft whistling sounds. The crashing sounds were so pleasing to the ears of the fishermen who had made a living on the sea for generations. The gentle waves were endless, constantly crashing, and would always wash some things floating on the sea, such as driftwood, to the edge of the beach. Sometimes the fishermen could pick up some good things. At this time, a black shadow rose and fell in the waves, constantly being driven. Finally, it approached the edge of the beach, and under the force of the waves, it landed on the beach. At this time, it was low tide. After the figure landed on the golden beach, it was no longer swept away by the sea. When the sea rushed over, it only made the figure sway slightly. There's someone here. Look, there's still some aura. Bring him back. Endless black torrents, each containing an extremely terrifying power, wreaked havoc in all directions and could destroy everything. That black color covered the sky and the earth, and it was all in sight. The body was wrapped in a layer of green light, bobbing up and down in the black torrent. As the waves flowed, the green light became weaker and weaker. The moment when he felt that he was about to die, he suddenly woke up. It was as if he had a nightmare. His whole body was covered in sweat, and waves of indescribable pain spread inside and outside his body. He couldn't move, and even his spiritual world seemed to be shattered. The pain was incomparable. This kind of pain was almost unbearable. He had just woken up and then fainted again. After an unknown amount of time, Chu Mu woke up again. As soon as he woke up, the pain swept over him like a tide. Every part of his body was trembling, and the tearing feeling of his spiritual world was still there. Fortunately, he could barely bear it. The strong willpower that had been tempered thousands of times took effect again, and Chu Mu endured this kind of pain. Very soon, he straightened out everything. The peerless second refinement expert of the divine clan, Tian Daoji, had used heavenly judgment. Its power was too strong, and he couldn't resist it even if he used all his strength. In the end, he had no choice but to borrow the force to blast open the void behind him and escape into the black hole in order to find a way out. Compared to being killed directly, escaping into the spatial black hole was a last resort. Now, it seemed that he was lucky that he did not die in the spatial black hole. However, his situation was not very good. His body was covered with injuries, both inside and outside. His injuries were so serious that even the life force of his divine body, which was far more powerful than an ordinary peak level 9 divine body, combined with the life force of the wood phase origin, could not heal him. In addition to the injuries on his body, even his spiritual world was severely damaged. It could be said that this was the most serious injury Chu Mu had suffered since his debut. There were traces of black energy in his body, which belonged to the power of spatial turbulence. They were constantly destroying Chu Mu's body, and Chu Mu's body was constantly recovering. As the two sides were fighting, only by expelling or exhausting the black energy could Chu Mu's body truly recover. Fortunately, after leaving the black hole, the black energy lost its support and could only be constantly exhausted. Chu Mu's life force, on the other hand, was derived from his own body and the wood aspect origin's output. It was almost endless. This was a small village with a population of only a little over 100. For generations, they relied on fishing for a living. There were no cultivators in the village. In front of the village was an endless sea, and behind the village was a mountain that was a few hundred meters tall. However, the mountain was a little barren and the trees were sparse. Moreover, it was slightly withered. It was obviously impossible for any beasts to survive in such a barren mountain. Fortunately, the villagers had been fishermen for generations, so they did not need to rely on the barren mountain for a living. A figure slowly walked up the rugged mountain path. His face was a little pale, and sweat seeped out of his forehead. However, there was a smile on his face as he looked up. After climbing around 300 meters, he stopped on a protruding rock. Sitting on the rock, he raised his head and looked in the direction of the sea. The azure sea stretched as far as the eye could see. It was vast and majestic, making people feel extremely comfortable just by looking at it. Chu Mu took in a deep breath. The wind from the sea became gentle, causing the strands of hair in front of his forehead to ruffle gently. This place was remote, so he did not know which region it belonged to. He could only confirm that he was still in the deep blue world. This was something worth rejoicing over. The energy of the world is too thin. It looks like I won't be able to recover that quickly, Chu Mu muttered to himself. The damage to his spiritual world caused him to temporarily be unable to use the power of his soul. Under such circumstances, he was unable to take out the pills in his interspatial ring to speed up the recovery of his injuries. He could only rely on his own life force to slowly recover. He wondered how his spiritual world was after it was damaged. At that time, he had no choice but to use the eternal sword intent, causing the annihilation sword intent that had yet to fully form to fluctuate. As for the power of the heavenly judgment, it had also entered the spiritual world bit by bit. It could be said that the damage to Chu Mu's spiritual world was related to one or both of these. He only hoped that it was not too serious. At a time like this, there was no point in being anxious. He might as well put down his anxiety and use a calm attitude to enjoy the rare peace. Perhaps the divine race thinks that I'm already dead. Chu Mu muttered to himself again. Unfortunately, I'm still alive. Furthermore, I will recover. When I become even stronger, it will be a disaster for all of you. All of my enemies. Chu Mu's eyesight had always been outstanding. Even if his body and spiritual world were severely damaged, he was still more outstanding than ordinary cultivators. Therefore, he could see the distant seaside. There were fishing boats approaching and docking on the beach. The fishermen who went out to the sea to fish in the village had returned. The mountain wind blew, gradually bringing with it a trace of coldness. The current Chu Mu's body was severely injured. He was only slightly better than an ordinary person. Therefore, he felt cold. He tightened the robe on his body. It had been a long time since he experienced the feeling of an ordinary person. It was as if he was reliving it. It was a kind of aftertaste. The sun was setting in the west. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on Chu Mu's face, making him feel a trace of warmth. This coldness and warmth coexisted. The feeling of being born in the world was so clear. Bit by bit, it was a kind of enlightenment. Perhaps he didn't know what use it had now, but accumulating it was always a good thing. Big Brother Chu, my father and the others have returned from fishing. A cheerful voice rang out like a golden bell. It was very pleasing to the ear. It was carried by the mountain wind into Chu Mu's ears. Chu Mu looked down. At the foot of the mountain, there was a person shouting with both hands in the shape of a trumpet. It was a young girl, the fisherman's daughter, Zhang Xiaohuan. She had just turned 18 years old. Her hair was tied up in 2 braids. She had a charming face and always had a smile on her face. She was like a fairy without worries. That day, it was her and her younger brother, Zhang Xiao, who had brought Chu Mu back from the seaside. Moreover, they had always taken care of him. They had saved Chu Mu's life. When he was with this happy and carefree girl, Chu Mu would always forget about other things and enjoy the peaceful life he had now. Perhaps, in his life, he would only have this period, and it wouldn't be for too long. After replying to Zhang Xiaohuan, Chu Mu stood up and walked to the other side of the boulder. He walked down again and slowly returned along the path he had come from. It took him nearly a quarter of an hour to cover the height of 1,000 feet. He arrived at the foot of the mountain. Big Brother Chu, my father caught a huge fish that weighed over 100 kilograms. This fish has lived for a long time, so it must be very nourishing. It'll be just nice for you to nourish your body. Zhang Xiaohuan happily grabbed Chu Mu's arm and pulled him along, quickly walking towards the village. The setting sun shone on the two of them, casting 2 shadows behind them. One was tall and the other was short. They walked side by side. In the distance, the fishermen who had just returned from fishing were all carrying today's harvest and returning to the fishing village. The fresh fish would allow them to enjoy a good meal. As for the remaining fish, they would be dried or pickled, or used to exchange for other food with other villages or stored. When they couldn't go out to sea, they would be used as backup food to ensure that they could survive until they could go out to sea again to fish. This was the daily life of the fishermen in the fishing village. It was plain and real. The novel, The Lone God of the Way of the Sword, will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click on the plus sign at the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred and follow. Hurry up! Chapter 1903. Big Brother Chu Mu, how about you be my brother-in-law? Zhang Xiao approached Chu Mu and whispered. You're so mischievous. Chu Mu patted Zhang Xiao's head lightly and laughed. I'm already 15. I'm not young anymore. Zhang Xiao shook her head unhappily and mumbled. Immediately, her eyes lit up. I can see that my sister must have fallen for Big Brother Chu. Let's go. The annual market is about to begin. Chu Mu said helplessly. He naturally knew that Zhang Xiaohuan had feelings for him. Chu Mu could understand her feelings. The small fishing village had a population of about 100 families. Almost 1/3 of them were young people. They had been living in the fishing village for generations, fishing for a living. Chu Mu floated over from the sea. To them, he was an outsider. This was enough to arouse the curiosity of many young people. They were curious about what the outside world was like. As for Chu Mu, in terms of appearance, he couldn't be considered a handsome man, but he was still better looking than normal people. Most importantly, his temperament was that of a peerless sword cultivator. Even if it was affected by his injuries, he still stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens in this small fishing village. A young girl yearning for love. He was also a man who was different from the common ones. His temperament was extraordinary, his background was mysterious, and he was full of attraction. Moreover, from his appearance, Chu Mu looked like he was only in his 20s. Even though he knew Zhang Xiaohuan's feelings, even though Zhang Xiaohuan could be considered as Chu Mu's savior, Chu Mu would not accept Zhang Xiaohuan's feelings. This was because they were not from the same world. The deep blue world and the ancient god world, cultivators and ordinary people. No matter which one it was like a natural chasm that could not be crossed. Therefore, Chu Mu pretended not to know. He only treated Zhang Xiaohuan as a sister. Speaking of which, his age was enough to be Zhang Xiaohuan's ancestor. The bazaar was held once a year at the foot of a mountain. At first, it was a place for different villages to exchange local specialties. Gradually, more and more villages joined in, forming a certain scale that eventually developed into a bazaar. Currently, there were already more than a dozen villages participating in the market. If one walked quickly, it would take about 5 or 6 days to reach the market from the fishing village. It should be known that although the population of the fishing village was not large, and they were not cultivators, they had been fishermen for generations. They went out to sea to catch fish, which made their bodies very strong. Moreover, some of the big fish in the sea had lived for a long time. The meat contained rich nutrients, and the soup made from the bones could replenish qi and blood, strengthen the muscles and bones. Therefore, the fishermen in the small fishing village were all very strong. It was not a big problem for them to lift 1,000 pounds. When they walked quickly, it was as if they were galloping horses. This time, a total of 11 people from the fishing village were going to participate in the annual bazaar. There were supposed to be 10 people, but Chu Mu had joined in at the moment. It had been a few months since Chu Mu had arrived in the fishing village. Part of his injuries had healed, allowing him to completely crush ordinary people. Even some of the weaker cultivators were no match for him. What made Chu Mu helpless was that he still had not opened his spiritual world, so he could not use his interspatial ring. Otherwise, his injuries would have healed faster. Since he was staying in the fishing village for the time being, Chu Mu naturally could not freeload. Therefore, he would go out to sea to catch fish sometimes. This was a new experience for Chu Mu, and he was never tired of it. He applied some of his understanding to fishing, which was almost always successful. Every time he went out to catch fish, the harvest would be several times greater than before. As a result, everyone in the fishing village thought more highly of Chu Mu. The fishing village relied on the sea for a living, and fishing was their profession. It had been passed down from generation to generation. To them, fishing was not only a way to prolong their lives, but it was also a kind of belief. Chu Mu also sensed more calmness and reality from interacting with ordinary people. The smoky aura around him gradually calmed down, like an ancient well. Intuition told Chu Mu that this might delay him for a while, but it was also beneficial to him. He was not in a hurry. Moreover, his injuries recovered slowly, so there was no need to rush. This time, he had volunteered to participate in the annual bazaar. He might be able to gain something if he walked around. The 11 people, including Chu Mu, were all pulling a trailer. The trailers were piled with small hills of dried fish. Each trailer weighed several thousand pounds. Zhang Xiao was only 15 years old, but she was very strong. She could easily lift up to 400 pounds. Therefore, it was not a big problem for her to drag a trailer filled with dried fish. When Chu Mu and the others arrived at the bazaar, people from other villages had already arrived and set up stalls. Chu-Mu glanced over and saw that the items on the stalls from different villages were all different. There were jars and jars. One of them was open, giving out a strong wine aroma. Chu-Mu noticed that the people from the fishing village could not help but sniff. They looked like they were about to drool. Some stalls were selling mountain products, such as ginseng, Polygonum multiflorum, and so on. They were all dried. There were also some stalls that sold dried vegetables. After all, they had to travel for a few days. After the transaction was completed, it would take a few more days before they could bring the dried vegetables back to the village. Without good preservation methods, they could only bring back a batch of rotten vegetables. As for preservation methods, ordinary people had them, but they were very limited. Therefore, they could only make dried vegetables or pickle them. Dried vegetables could be melted after being boiled. They did not taste as good as fresh vegetables, but they were still good. Soon, the people from the fishing village also set up stalls. Batches of dried fish were placed. The smell of the sea and fish filled the air, making the people in the nearby stalls sniff hard. Different villages had different specialties. They bartered and agreed on the price. Then, they immediately exchanged. Chu-Mu left the stalls to other people to take care of. He stood up and planned to walk around. The bazaar was not very big. After all, it was only the scale of a dozen villages. The total number of people who came to the bazaar was less than 200. Not long after, Chu-Mu had finished his stroll. In the end, he stopped at a stall selling fruit. The fruits did not look very fresh. They seemed to have lost a lot of water. Yet, Chu-Mu's gaze was attracted by one of the fruits. Different from the other fruits, this one seemed to still retain enough moisture and looked plump. However, it was completely cyan in color, as if it hadn't ripened yet. It couldn't help but make one's mouth sour. "How do you want to exchange these fruits?" Chu-Mu asked. "What do you have?" The stall owner was dressed like a farmer. "Dried fish. I have a total of 300 pounds of these fruit." "I'll give you 300 pounds of dried fish," Shan Nong said. "Okay." Chu-Mu did not bargain. "What fruit is this? It looks like it's not ripe yet." Chu-Mu pointed at the green fruit and asked. "I don't know. I picked this fruit from a cliff on the mountain. It's a little sour, but after eating it, you will feel energetic," Shan Nong replied. "Sounds good. Do you have more of this fruit?" Chu-Mu asked again. "There are some others, but they are all under the cliff. It's very dangerous. I can't pick them." Shan Nong smiled. "I wonder if you can take me to the cliff to have a look," Chu-Mu said. "I can give you an extra 100 pounds of dried fish as a reward." Shan Nong's eyes lit up when he heard that. He could get an extra 100 pounds of dried fish just by showing the way. It was a good deal. He immediately agreed. "Now, pack up these fruits and follow me," Chu-Mu said. He first picked up the green fruit and threw it into his mouth, chewing and swallowing it. It was indeed a little sour, but that wasn't the main point. The main point was that after he ate the fruit, it turned into a weak clear stream that flowed from the bottom to the top, flowing into his spiritual world. Instantly, his spiritual world, which was constantly in pain, seemed to have slowed down a little. Sure enough, Chu-Mu's heart flashed with a touch of joy. There seemed to be hope for his spiritual world to recover faster. Perhaps such a simple life would be enjoyable, but it would not last long. Chu-Mu naturally would not let go of a way to accelerate his spiritual world's recovery. After telling Zhang Xiao and the others, Chu-Mu set off with Shan Nong. As for the 300 pounds of fruits, he let Zhang Xiao and the others take them back to the fishing village. "Big brother Chu, will you come back?" Zhang Xiao asked. "Yes." Chu-Mu smiled and patted Zhang Xiao's head. He would come back again. But by then, it might be goodbye. Shan Nong's village was slightly bigger than the fishing village. It had a population of more than 200 families. It was located at the foot of the mountain. This mountain was a few thousand feet high. It was verdant and lush, full of vitality. It was completely different from the barren mountain of the fishing village. Therefore, the villagers of Luo Shan village relied on the mountain to make a living. They went up the mountain to hunt or pick fruits. Some of them were eaten by themselves, some were made into jerky, and so on. They would trade with other villages or trade in large quantities at the annual market. Shan Nong quickly put away the 400 pounds of dried fish. After bidding farewell to his wife and child, he took Chu Mu up the mountain. For the people of Luo Shan village, going up the mountain was a very common thing. Therefore, his wife and child did not miss him. They just reminded him to come back safely. "Big brother, let's go," Shan Nong called Chu Mu. "Let's go." Chu Mu nodded. Although he had only recovered a little from his injuries, his strong body still gave him strength that far exceeded that of an ordinary person. Climbing up the mountain was a piece of cake for him. He walked as if he was flying. This surprised Shan Nong, who relied on the mountain for a living. Along the way, Shan Nong shared some of his experiences. Chu Mu also smiled and replied. The two of them quickly walked towards the cliff that Shan Nong mentioned. After about 4 hours, they arrived at the edge of the cliff. The novel Lone God of the Way of the Sword will have more new content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there is a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account thread and follow. Hurry up! Chapter 1904. After bringing Chu Mu to the edge of the cliff, Shan Nong completed his deal with Chu Mu. However, he was still eager to wait for Chu Mu. Chu Mu asked him to go back first. Shan Nong looked at the sky. It was getting late. He thought of his wife and children at home, so he dismissed the idea of staying. "Big brother, I'll come back tomorrow." "Be careful," Shan Nong said and turned to go down the mountain. After Shan Nong left, Chu Mu retracted his gaze. He stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down. His extraordinary eyesight allowed him to see more than 10 green fruit. They were the same ones that Chu Mu had eaten before. Green fruit. A kind of spiritual fruit. The green fruit was a kind of spiritual fruit and also a kind of spiritual medicine. However, spiritual medicine was often extraordinary. Even an ordinary person would be able to sense that it was extraordinary. However, the green fruit was different from ordinary spiritual medicine. It did not have any fluctuations in the qi of heaven and earth, nor would it emit any obvious fluctuations in spiritual power. Even some cultivators with profound cultivation would only treat the green fruit as an ordinary fruit if they did not recognize it, let alone an ordinary person. Chu Mu had received the inheritance of an alchemy grandmaster in his early years. In addition, he had read many ancient books and had an amazing knowledge of spiritual medicine. Therefore, he knew about the green fruit, which was a very rare spiritual fruit. Strictly speaking, the green fruit was not a high-level spiritual medicine. It was more ordinary and had only one use, which was to heal spiritual injuries. Of course, the effect was weaker. Chu Mu's spiritual world had been injured. To a certain extent, it could be considered a spiritual injury. The green fruit could naturally have some effect. This was also why he was so happy. The green fruit grew from the top to the bottom. The closest one was a few meters away from the cliff, while the lowest one was more than 10 meters away. For an ordinary person like Shan Nong, it was naturally very difficult to pick them. Although he had some methods, he had eaten those fruits before. They were sour and tasted bad. The only thing that helped him feel better after eating them was that they were of no help to him, so why should he take the risk? To Chu Mu, this wasn't difficult at all. In just a few moments, he arrived at the first green will fruit and casually plucked it before tossing it into his mouth. Soon, more than a dozen green will fruits fell into Chu Mu's mouth and turned into a clear stream. The clear stream flowed into his spiritual world and healed the damage to his spiritual world bit by bit. However, the level of the green will fruit was not high, and it did not really target the spiritual world. Instead, it was on the spiritual level, so the effect was not very obvious. After consuming more than a dozen greeny fruits, Chu Mu could still feel that the tearing pain in his mind had lessened significantly. What a pity! If there were a few hundred greeny fruits, perhaps the spiritual world could be reopened, and the power of the soul could be used, Chu Mu thought to himself. Looking down, it was a little dark. Chu Mu hesitated for a moment before continuing to climb down. There was no reason. It was just a feeling. After descending for another few dozen meters, Chu Mu found another green fruit. However, it was blocked by some protruding rocks previously, so Chu Mu did not see it. The color of this green fruit was deeper. It was not pure green, but dark green. The medicinal effect of the dark green fruit should be stronger, Chu Mu thought to himself. He plucked the fruit and consumed it. Indeed, the clear stream was much stronger. With this harvest, Chu Mu was even more determined to climb down. Along the way down, there were endless harvests. Dark cyan-colored green intent fruits were continuously consumed. In a short period of time, Chu Mu had consumed another dozen dark cyan-colored green intent fruit. Each one's effects were 2 to 3 times better than the cyan-colored green intent fruit. This is... Chu Mu looked at the fruit in front of him in surprise. The fruit was black. No, it should be green. However, the color was very deep, so it looked black. This was indeed a green fruit, but it was much more effective than an ordinary green fruit. After consuming one, sure enough, the effect of this dark green fruit was 10 times better than the green fruit. Perhaps my spiritual world can be reopened here. Chu Mu was quite happy in his heart. There were not many dark green fruits, but as Chu Mu continued to descend, he still gained something. He plucked and consumed one fruit after another. The cool and comfortable feeling on the spiritual level reduced the pain of tearing. It also allowed Chu Mu to concentrate more and transform in a good way. When he reached the bottom of the cliff, his feet landed on the ground. In front of him was the last green fruit. This green fruit was dark and pure. Is this the last one? With a thought, Chu Mu removed all distracting thoughts. He plucked it and consumed it. A large clear stream, like the water of a long river, quickly flowed into the spiritual world. Suddenly, the spiritual world trembled, and a crack seemed to have appeared in the original seal. Open! With his strong will and the help of the clear stream of the green fruit that had not been consumed, Chu Mu bombarded the crack as if he had pushed open a door. This feeling that he had not felt in a long time made Chu Mu extremely excited, but also extremely nervous. How was the spiritual world? Was it broken? As Chu Mu's consciousness entered the spiritual world, he was stunned. The spiritual world was not broken. It was just that there were some major injuries that could be recovered. The annihilation sword intent, which he thought would collapse, had returned to its original state. The eternal sword intent was still suppressing it as if he had never used it. However, in this spiritual world there was a very unfamiliar power. That power was like smoke and mist, and it carried an extreme aura. It was high and mighty, as if it represented the will of the sky. Although it was unfamiliar, Chu Mu recognized it. This power was the power that the heavenly Tao judgment had blasted into his spiritual world that day. It was also the power that had caused his spiritual world to be injured and even sealed. Now, it seemed that for some reason, this power was quietly staying in Chu Mu's spiritual world. His consciousness mobilized the power of his soul and approached the smoke-like power. It was very gentle and did not cause any backlash. Chu Mu carefully sensed it, and from it, he could feel a kind of majesty and loftiness that belonged to the heavens. The heavenly Tao is powerful, and it judges all living things in the world. The people of the Tian clan claim to be the descendants of the gods, and they claim to uphold justice on behalf of the heavens. Although they are arrogant, they have some ability. Chu Mu thought, this kind of power cannot be considered the true power of the heavenly Tao. However, it contains a trace of the power of the heavenly Tao. Even if it is very weak, it is still relative. How powerful was the power of the heavenly Tao! Even a saint emperor might not be able to withstand it, let alone a mere peerless expert. This kind of power could be called the power of the heavenly Tao. Compared to the true power of the heavenly Tao, perhaps it was less than 1/10,000th, but it was still very shocking. Perhaps I can refine this power of the heavenly Tao. A thought flashed through Chu Mu's mind. He had a sword style called Heaven's Might. It was very powerful. If he could integrate the power of the heavenly Tao, its power would definitely increase greatly. But before I refine it, I still need to recover from my injuries, he thought to himself. With a move of his soul, he immediately took out a pill from his space ring. His space ring was very large and stored many things. There were more than 100 kinds of pills in it. Although the pills that could heal the wounds of the spiritual world were very precious, Chu Mu just happened to have a bottle, which was his spoils of war. He took out the pill and consumed it. A cool stream of air flowed into his spiritual world. As it flowed, it constantly consumed his energy. At the same time, it also healed the various wounds of his spiritual world. These pills were extremely valuable. Every single one of them had shocking effect. Just a single pill would be enough to heal the slightly more severe wounds of the spiritual world. However, Chu Mu had to refine 5 of them before he could fully recover. This was enough to show how severe the wounds of his spiritual world were. Now that the wounds of his spiritual world were healed, Chu Mu felt rather excited. He had not felt this for a long time. Next, I need to heal the wounds of my body, he thought to himself. Muttering to himself, Chu Mu took out another pill. It was the spoils of war he obtained from killing Sun Jin. After consuming one of the pills, a powerful vitality swept through his body, replenishing Chu Mu's blood essence and making it stronger. The black aura that was like a maggot in one's bones began to be consumed bit by bit under the impact of the gradually strengthening blood essence. Chu Mu's life force and the life force of the wood aspect's origin also joined in. The 3 sides encircled and suppressed the black aura. Sure enough, with the help of the pills, the wounds of his body healed many times faster than before. One pill after another was refined by Chu Mu. His blood essence was constantly recovering and strengthening. The black aura that was entrenched in his body and hindering the recovery of his injuries gradually decreased. This black aura was incomparably tenacious. Just a little bit of it had astonishing power. If it were not for this, with Chu Mu's powerful life force and the support of the wood aspect's origin, he would have driven it away long ago. There would not have been a need to wait until today. The sky was dark and the bottom of the cliff was pitch black. No one knew that there was a person in this place. As Yi Futian continued to refine, the black aura became less and less. When the last wisp of black aura was defeated by Chu Mu, his body trembled. His blood essence, which had returned to its original state, was pure and red. It was like the water of a great river, surging in his blood vessels. There seemed to be thunder rumbling. Countless roaring sounds rolled out. A terrifying aura spread out from his body. The ground around him shattered and collapsed. Vaguely, it seemed to have turned into a vacuum domain. Just by relying on the strength of his body, the aura that spread out could form a vacuum domain around him. It was enough to show the strength of his body. It was unimaginable. Gradually, the surging blood essence calmed down and returned to its normal speed. Chu Mu exhaled. That aura was like a sharp sword, piercing through the void and disappearing. The feeling of having his divine body completely recovered was really good. He got up and clenched his fists. A cracking sound immediately rang out. It seemed that as long as he made a move, he could easily destroy this 1,000-foot-tall cliff. It was not an illusion. He could really do it. Suddenly, Chu Mu felt an extremely weak aura fluctuation. The novel, The Lone God of the Way of the Sword, will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there is a 100% chance of a lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click on the plus sign at the top right and add friend. Search for the public account, dread, and follow. Hurry up. Chapter 1905. A normal green fruit was pure green in color. However, the dark green or even dark green fruit that was discovered later belonged to the mutated variety. One mutation might be a coincidence, but there must be a reason for two mutations. I think I've found the reason, Chu-Mu muttered to himself. Just now, after he recovered his spiritual world, he could use all of his soul power. His six senses were also at their peak, and he felt traces of unusual fluctuations. Logically speaking, in a place like this, where the chi of heaven and earth was thin, there should not be any treasures. However, those traces of energy fluctuations alerted Chu-Mu. Combined with the situation of the green fruit, he determined that there must be something unusual here. His soul power immediately spread out, and his six senses were at their peak. Those traces of energy seemed like an illusion, disappearing without a trace. His sword realm spread out, covering all directions. His heart sword was activated, and the power of the heart of the sword spread out. Chu-Mu used everything that could be used. At this moment the sky was pitch black. Only a few cold stars twinkled, as if they were telling him something. Time passed slowly. Chu-Mu was very patient. He firmly believed that his judgment would not be wrong. In the blink of an eye, an hour had passed. Chu-Mu's eyes flashed as he finally caught a glimpse of that aura fluctuation. The first time, it was an unintentional feeling. The second time, he caught it intentionally. Since he caught it, he would not miss it. Following the traces of energy fluctuations, Chu-Mu caught it with all his might and extended it. It's here. His eyes flashed as if they were condensed into two sword light. He pointed his finger forward, like a sword unsheathing from its scabbard. As the sword light flashed, a trace of it pierced through the void and tore the mountain wall in front of him. After his wounds healed and his cultivation recovered, Chu-Mu's strength had reached the pinnacle of first refinement. He was extremely powerful. Even if he didn't use his sword and merely pointed his finger, he had the powerful strength to kill a bright young sword saint. How could a mere, normal mountain wall block that? The power of the finger continued forward, tearing holes in the mountain wall. Finally, with a pop, the power of the finger shattered, as if it had been blocked. Chu-Mu dug out a passageway and went in. He went in for a few dozen meters before he was stopped. It was a transparent cover. It couldn't be seen, but it could be felt. The aura was emitted from the transparent cover. It was extremely weak. Even an exceptional first refinement expert would not be able to sense it. Even some second refinement experts who were not outstanding in their sixth sense would not be able to sense it. Chu-Mu's sixth sense was extremely outstanding. Even some peerless second refinement experts might not be able to compare to it. In addition, he had grasped the essence of the heart and sword as one. The power of the heart of the sword was mysterious and boundless. Thus, he was able to sense the slight fluctuation of the aura. After carefully observing for a moment and making a few attempts, Chu-Mu finally made his move. With the silver light spiritual sword in his hand, he used the sword intent as the main force and channeled all sorts of power into it. Instantly, the silver light on the sword shone brightly and finally gathered in front of him. He stabbed out with the sword, but it was silently blocked by an invisible protective cover. He continued to push the silver light spiritual sword forward. The protective cover that was stabbed by the tip of the sword began to cave in. Break! With a low shout, he channeled power into the sword once again. The sword trembled slightly and bent slightly. As Chu-Mu continued to channel power, the sword became more and more bent. Break! The second sound rang out. Chu-Mu channeled power into his wrist. Under the impact of the sword intent of tremors, the bent sword instantly straightened. A powerful force burst out and rushed to both sides. Break! The third sound rang out. The force that came from the recoil was forcefully blocked by Chu-Mu. Then, it merged with the force that came from his body and blasted out through the sword. The force was even more ferocious. A very soft but very clear sound was transmitted into Chu Mu's ears. Although it was invisible, Chu Mu could feel that the resistance under the sword dissipated instantly. He immediately dispersed the force that was thrusting forward and stopped in an instant. He displayed amazing control over his own strength. After the protective cover was broken, it suddenly disappeared. A circular disc appeared in front of Chu Mu. That compass was suspended more than a meter above the ground. It was motionless and emitted a very unique aura fluctuation. Chu Mu observed for a moment and didn't find anything unusual. He then covered the compass with his soul force. With a roll, the compass fell into his hand. This compass was about the size of an adult's open palm. It was green in color and covered with black veined patterns. The veined patterns were twisted and intertwined in an intricate manner. It looked chaotic and disorderly. In the end, they all converged at the center and condensed into a single point. That single point seemed to be the starting point of the countless lines. It also seemed to be the ending point, forming an endless cycle. As he looked at it, Chu Mu felt that the lines were difficult to straighten out. Moreover, his consciousness seemed to be sucked into it. He felt a little dizzy. He was sure that if a person's soul wasn't strong enough, they would definitely feel dizzy if they looked at it a few more times. One had to know that Chu Mu's soul was so strong that the average first refinement peerless master might not be comparable to it. What kind of treasure is this? Chu Mu thought to himself. He was sure that this compass was a treasure, but he didn't know what kind of treasure it was. Its aura is mysterious. It should be a spiritual treasure. Let me refine it and see. With that, Chu Mu sat in the small cave and began to refine the compass he had just obtained. The most common way to refine a treasure was to drip blood on it. However, when the blood dripped, the compass didn't absorb it. The blood lotus failed. Fortunately, Chu Mu had another refining method, which was to refine it with the power of his spirit. The power of his spirit surged out and instantly ignited. It turned into a spirit fire and enveloped the compass, burning it fiercely. Under the burning spirit fire, strands of spirit power seeped into the compass bit by bit. The strands of spirit power that entered the compass first entered the center of the compass, either the starting point or the ending point. Once the center was filled, it began to advance towards every line in all directions. There were far too many lines. The amount of spirit power required was also very large. Gradually, Chu Mu's face turned pale. Without the slightest hesitation, he took out a pill to recover his spiritual energy and consumed it. Although the pill was rare and precious, he had no choice but to do so in the current situation. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would have been for naught. Moreover, the compass that required so much spiritual energy to refine was definitely an extraordinary treasure. A single elixir restored most of Chu Mu's spirit power. He continued to pour it in. However, there were far too many lines. With the injection of spirit power, wherever the spirit power passed, the lines lit up little by little. Chu Mu understood that only by filling all the lines of the compass with spirit power could he truly refine the compass. Soon, dawn arrived. Shan Nong went up the mountain and came to the cliff again. However, he didn't find Chu Mu's figure. He looked down the cliff. It was a little dark below. With his eyesight, he could only vaguely see some things. However, he could see that the original dozen or so green fruits were gone. Those fruits were probably picked by Big Brother. However, did Big Brother leave, or did he fall down the cliff? Shan Nong looked carefully. Although it was vague, he didn't see any corpse. Shan Nong felt that Big Brother should have left after picking the fruit. That Big Brother is probably not an ordinary person. Otherwise, how would he dare to climb down the cliff and pick the fruits? Shan Nong muttered. He wasn't angry at all. He turned and left. Today, he had to go to some other places to pick fruit. Shan Nong was a simple person. He didn't think about anything else. In the blink of an eye, the sun set and night fell. Chu Mu was still refining. He had already taken the 4th elixir to restore spirit power, but he still hadn't finished refining the compass. The more it was like this, the brighter Chu Mu's eyes became. This compass must be an extraordinary treasure. Refining, 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 continuously refining. In the blink of an eye, the night faded and a new day came. This is the last elixir. Chu Mu thought. If he still couldn't refine the compass after taking this elixir, the consequences would be very serious. However, Chu Mu felt that the compass had entered the final refining process. Perhaps he could succeed. When the last trace of spirit power was exhausted, the end of the lines on the compass lit up at the same time. However, Chu Mu fell into a coma. The spirit flame on the compass was extinguished. The compass also trembled and turned into a dot of light. It entered Chu Mu's forehead. The trembling primordial spirit that was about to be damaged immediately stabilized. The sun rose and the moon set. Night and day alternated. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days passed. Chu Mu's eyelids trembled and he woke up. However, as he had just woken up, there was still some confusion in his eyes. However, it quickly receded and was replaced by a flicker of light. Waves of weakness came from the spiritual world. With a thought, Chu Mu knew what was going on. The spirit power he had used to refine the compass had only recovered a little. His consciousness sank into the spiritual world to take a look. A compass occupied the center of the spiritual world, which was also the top of his primordial spirit's head. Countless threads stretched out from the compass. The threads crisscrossed and stretched out in all directions. They were faintly discernible, and if one took a closer look, they would find that they were the same as the lines on the compass. The compass was at the center. It was like a starting point and also like an end point. Looks like it's been refined. I wonder what kind of treasure this compass is? Muttering to himself, Chu Mu's consciousness suddenly approached the compass. When it came into contact with it, there was a feeling of harmony. This was because the compass had been completely refined by Chu Mu. It had become his and was residing in his spiritual world. When his consciousness entered the compass, waves of information also emerged from the depths of the compass and flowed into Chu Mu's consciousness. This allowed Chu Mu to know the name of this compass. What kind of treasure was it? What kind of effects did it have? The novel, The Lone God of the Way of the Sword, will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there is a 100% chance of a lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign at the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred and follow it. Hurry! Chapter 1906. The Apotheosis Compass. It was a very resounding name, and its various effects were indeed worthy of such a name. The Apotheosis Compass had a total of 4 effects. The first effect was to shield Chu Mu's whereabouts, making it impossible for others to deduce his whereabouts. Previously, Chu Mu had been hunted down because his whereabouts had been deduced. Even though it was not 100% accurate, it was at least 60% to 80% accurate. It felt as if someone had located him, and his whereabouts had been leaked. No matter where he went, he could be attacked. It was not good. Now that he had refined the Apotheosis Compass and shielded himself from the heavens, he would no longer be deduced by others. Of course, there was a limit to the shielding of the heavens. However, Chu Mu vaguely understood that only a holy emperor level of deduction could break through the shielding of the Apotheosis Compass. This was undoubtedly a very important and rare effect for Chu Mu. The second effect was to stabilize the spiritual world. From the Apotheosis Compass, there were faintly discernible lines that crisscrossed, like the reflections of the lines on the Apotheosis Compass. They came into contact with the barrier of the spiritual world, locked in and entrenched. Like the roots of a large tree, they firmly took root, causing the spiritual world to seem to have a center and become even more stable and resilient. After refining the Apotheosis Compass and entering the spiritual world, Chu Mu could feel that the stability of his spiritual world had increased by at least 10 times. Perhaps when he was attacked by the heavenly judgment, if he had the apotheosis compass guarding his spiritual world would not have suffered any obvious damage, and would not have been sealed. However, that was in the past. If that had not happened, Chu Mu would not have come here and obtained the apotheosis compass. Perhaps it was true that one who survived a great disaster was bound to have good fortune in the future. The third effect was to release the God-sealing light. This was a type of light, and its function was to imprison the target's mental world. Thinking about it, once the mental world was imprisoned, the power within the mental world would not be able to be used. This meant that the six senses would be severely affected, and their senses would become sluggish. Their reactions would decrease, and their strength would decrease. The third effect was extremely ferocious, so it had obvious limitations. The stronger one's spiritual world was, the shorter the duration of the imprisonment, and the less obvious the effects would be. Moreover, using the God-sealing light to imprison the target's spiritual world would consume a large amount of the user's spiritual energy. The fourth effect was called the God-sealing domain. Domain was the ultimate form of the God-sealing light. However, with Chu Mu's current strength, it was impossible for him to use it. However, during the initial refinement, the first and second effects would naturally take effect. As for the other two effects, they would need to be further refined before they could be used one by one. Even if I can't use the fourth effect, the first three are enough for me. Chu Mu thought to himself, since I have the apotheosis compass to stabilize my spiritual world, then I'll take this opportunity to refine the pseudo-heavenly energy in my spiritual world and integrate it into the central sword shadow. In the depths of Chu Mu's mind, in the center, there was a sword shadow floating in the air. The heaven's might sword style was comprehended from this sword shadow. Refine. The sword shadow trembled under Chu Mu's will and released a wave of power. It immediately entered the spiritual world and flew toward the pseudo-heavenly energy. Sure enough, as Chu Mu had expected, the pseudo-heavenly energy did not seem to have any movements, but when Chu Mu was about to refine it, it immediately erupted with an astonishing power. It was like the wrath of the heavens, enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens and judging everything that dared to blaspheme it. At this moment, the pseudo-heavenly energy that was like smoke and mist was surrounded by countless electric arcs. The power was filled with a destructive aura as if it had transformed into a heavenly Tao azure dragon. The terrifying power rushed in all directions, attacking Chu Mu's primordial spirit and sword soul, attacking everything in the spiritual world, and then attacking the barrier of the spiritual world. However, with the apotheosis compass holding down the fort, the spiritual world was 10 times more stable. Although the power of the pseudo-heavenly energy was shocking, under the impact, it was unable to shake the strengthened spiritual world. All the power was resisted. Seeing this, Chu Mu immediately heaved a sigh of relief and wholeheartedly refined it. The pseudo-heavenly energy that had lost its source was like duckweed in the water. No matter how strong it was, it could not last for long. Under Chu Mu's determined refinement, it was stripped away bit by bit and merged with the sword image. The sword image was first comprehended by the heavenly sword saint from the broken sword. That broken sword was said to be the divine sword of the heavenly path sword sect from the ancient times. Afterwards, the sword image was merged with the other sword images comprehended from the forest of 10,000 sword steels of the true God sword sect. It slowly solidified from an illusory state. It was covered in sword way runes that were extremely profound and mysterious. The various sword moves that Chu Mu comprehended were inseparable from it. Like a tug of war, the pseudo-heavenly energy was constantly refined. There was less and less of it, and its power weakened. On the other hand, Chu Mu's sword image became more and more solid. The sword way runes that represented the heavenly might sword style became brighter and brighter. When the pseudo-heavenly energy was completely refined, the sword way runes of the heavenly might sword style became much brighter than before. The power of the Heavenly Might Sword style will definitely increase by a lot. In that case, I'll change it to the Great Heavenly Might Sword style, Chu-Mu muttered to himself. It's a pity that the pseudo-heavenly energy is too little. Otherwise, the power of the Heavenly Might Sword style could be increased even more. It could even be refined into other sword moves to increase their power. If there's enough of it, I can even completely solidify the sword image. After muttering to himself, Chu-Mu did not dwell on it. After all, being able to recover and obtain a treasure like the God-sealing compass was already a great gain. Refining the pseudo-heavenly energy and strengthening the Heavenly Might Sword style to become the Great Heavenly Might Sword style was already an additional gain. It was not to say that the Heavenly Might Sword style was more powerful than the Heavenly Assassination and Earthly Calamity Sword style. In fact, the Heavenly Assassination and Earthly Calamity Sword style was the most powerful move among the sword moves that Chu-Mu had mastered. However, the Heavenly Might Sword style was more suitable to be infused with the pseudo-heavenly energy. This was due to the characteristics of the Heavenly Might Sword style itself. It was like the wrath of the heavens and was extremely majestic. Perhaps the power of the Great Heavenly Might Sword style would not be inferior to the Heavenly Assassination and Earthly Calamity Sword style. It's time to leave. Chu-Mu walked out of the small temporary cave and looked up at the sky. It was late at night. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. It was really a good day. But before I leave, I have to go back first. The so-called go back referred to the place where he had stayed for a few months. It was a temporary home in the fishing village. He was going back to bid farewell. Without any pretense, Chu-Mu turned into a sword light and shot straight up into the sky. Then, with a smooth turn, he streaked across the sky and quickly left. No one knew that Chu-Mu had recovered from his injuries and cultivation in this remote place. Moreover, he had obtained a treasure and his strength had increased slightly. After his cultivation had recovered, the speed of sword flight was extremely fast. The journey that would have taken 10 days was covered in a short moment. Soon, Chu-Mu arrived in the sky above the fishing village. It was late at night. The fishing village was quiet. Under the shroud of darkness, the fishermen had all fallen asleep. Chu-Mu descended from the sky and landed outside Zhang Xiaohuan's door. At the same time, the door opened and Zhang Xiaohuan walked out with a lantern in her hand. "Brother Chu, you're back," Zhang Xiaohuan called out joyfully. "Yeah, I'm back to bid farewell." Chu-Mu naturally understood Zhang Xiaohuan's intentions. However, he would not accept it. Since that was the case, he might as well be direct. Zhang Xiaohuan was stunned. Then, she forced a smile and said, "Brother Chu, are you leaving? Why don't you wait until tomorrow?" "No need. I've already spent a lot of time recovering here," Chu-Mu said. Then, he waved his hand and 4 beams of green light shot out. One entered Zhang Xiaohuan's body, while the other 3 entered Zhang Xiao and her parents. They hid in their bodies and slowly released weak auras. "Goodbye." With that, Chu-Mu turned into a sword light and shot into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he vanished into the night. Zhang Xiaohuan hurriedly took a few steps away. Looking at the sword light that had vanished, her eyes became hazy with tears. She knew that Brother Chu was no ordinary person, which was why she had never dared to say anything. To Chu-Mu, parting like this was only a small interlude in his life. It was like a tiny wave in the ocean. Before he left, the 4 beams of green light that he shot out were the life force of the origin of the wood form. After being compressed by him, they were hidden in the bodies of Zhang Xiaohuan and her family. Imperceptibly, it would improve their bodies, strengthen their life force, and extend their lifespans. Even if they were injured, as long as it was not fatal, they would be able to recover at a speed several dozen times faster than before. To ordinary people, obtaining superhuman strength was not a good thing. On the other hand, a stronger body and a longer lifespan would bring about better changes after they were born. When they went out to sea to fish, it would be safer and they would be able to reap greater rewards. In this way, they would be able to repay the debt of saving Chu Mu's life. Perhaps many years later, when Chu Mu reminisced, he would be able to find this past from the corner of his memory. In those short few months there was a rare peace and tranquility, and there was also that charming and smiling girl in his memory. The sword light broke through the night and flew into the sky above the ocean, heading towards the endless sea. Chu Mu still did not know where this place was. He had to find the others as soon as possible to understand the situation and their location. Only then could he return and proceed according to his previous plan. They flew and flew and flew. Gradually, the darkness of the night changed and faded away. Traces of gray appeared, followed by the arrival of dawn. After flying continuously for most of the night, with Chu Mu's amazing speed, he did not know how many miles he had flown. At a glance, all he could see was seawater. The vast ocean was boundless, and there was no end in sight. There was also no land in sight. His soul power spread out and permeated, but he could only sense seawater. In a place like this, it was easy to lose one's sense of direction because there was no way to distinguish between the north and south. At this time, Chu Mu could only feel that from afar, there seemed to be traces of a vast and mighty aura, blowing with the sea breeze. The novel, The Lone God of the Way of the Sword, will have more new content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there is a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account thread and follow. Hurry up! Chapter 1907. The calm surface of the sea was blue and incomparably deep. It was like a huge blue gemstone embedded in the ground. Suddenly, as if the water was boiling, bubbles gradually emerged from the bottom, breaking the calm. The seawater began to boil, and the sound of the bubbles gradually became louder and louder, spreading in all directions. The seawater within a radius of a few hundred miles began to boil, and countless white waves emerged from the bottom, rushing up. It seemed that something was emerging from the bottom of the sea. That thing was huge. Wisps of powerful aura were spreading out from the bottom of the countless boiling white waves, gradually spreading in all directions. Boom, 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 boom. Intense sounds of wind breaking came from afar, and one figure after another appeared. They were either sword-light, flying birds, or other flying treasures, rushing over from afar. Sure enough, my calculations were correct. The underwater palace is about to appear. A middle-aged man sitting on a green flying bird with a sharp beak stared at the boiling seawater, his face full of excitement. This was an opportunity. My opportunity is here. The opportunity to break through is here. A black-robed old man with his hands behind his back stared at the boiling seawater, as if he could see through it to see the huge thing gradually emerging from the bottom. His eyes were filled with excitement, and his pupils were trembling. More and more lights flashed, rapidly approaching, indicating that more and more people were rushing over from afar. Soon, more than 20 people stopped in the sky and looked down. Gradually, a sharp object appeared from the boiling white waves. It was like a sharp sword, piercing through the sea and pointing to the sky, gradually rising up. Immediately, the boiling of the seawater intensified by several times, and a black shadow appeared in the white waves. The top of a palace gradually rose up as it emerged from the bottom of the sea. Not long after, half of the palace rose up and appeared on the surface of the sea. It did not stop there and continued to rise. There were already more than 50 cultivators who had rushed over. Their eyes were burning with excitement as they stared at the palace, and their breathing became rapid. There was an opportunity in this palace, and it was called fortune. Ha 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 ha, this palace has finally appeared in the world. Since this sovereign has encountered it, this is this sovereign's opportunity, this sovereign's good fortune. An incomparably domineering voice suddenly resounded through the heavens and earth. The rumbling roar shook the 50-plus people, causing their expressions to change. At the same time, they were inwardly furious, but at the same time, they were also incomparably fearful because they had all heard this domineering voice before. Immediately, a figure appeared in their minds. Thunder rumbled in the sky as lightning raged. Following that, a figure descended like a bolt of black lightning. An extremely overbearing aura spread in all directions, filling the void. Under the pressure, the 50 people all felt their bodies become heavy, and they felt a slight numbness all over their bodies. Lightning Devil Supremacy, if you want this fortune, you'll have to ask the sword in my hand. It was peerlessly sharp, and a single word seemed capable of slicing through everything in the world. When it entered the ears of everyone, it instantly caused their souls to tremble while traces of pain suffused their entire bodies, and it was as if their bodies were being sliced into pieces. As soon as he finished speaking, a sword light tore through the void and arrived in an instant. Lan Jianxing, this sovereign wants to see if the sword in your hand is sharper or this sovereign's devil lightning is more tyrannical. Lightning Devil Supremacy coldly laughed, tyrannical in the heavens and earth. A tall figure clad in black battle armor stood in the void, like a giant standing between the heavens and earth. Above his head, a black thundercloud gathered and rotated. Countless pitch-black lightning bolts shuttled back and forth like black dragons, emitting a shocking aura of destruction. This person was none other than Lightning Devil Supremacy, a supreme expert at the peak of the 9-star Saint Realm. His strength far surpassed ordinary peak 9-star Saint Realm experts. There was once a record of him instantly killing a few ordinary peak 9-star Saint Realm experts with a single move. He was one of the supreme experts in this sea region. Opposite Lightning Devil Supremacy was the person controlling the sword light. He wore a long green robe with a silver sword imprinted on it. It was vivid and lifelike, emitting a shocking sharpness. In his eyes, there was a silver sword imprint that was incomparably sharp. With a single glance, it was as if a sharp sword was slicing through everything, causing one's heart to turn cold. Lan Jianxing, a supreme expert of the Sword Dao, the third sword seat of the Solitary Sword sect. His cultivation base was at the peak of the 9-star Saint Realm, but his true strength far surpassed ordinary peak 9-star Saint Realm experts. He once used the strength of a sword to kill a peak 9-star Saint Realm sea beast. One had to know that the sea beast's body was huge, and its physique was incomparably shocking. The blood chi energy and sea beast energy contained within its body was boundless and boundless. A peak 9-star Saint Realm sea beast's strength was more than 100 times stronger than an ordinary peak 9-star Saint Realm human. However, it was killed by a single sword strike from Lan Jianxing. It was enough to show how terrifying his strength was. Lightning Devil Supremacy was a lone cultivator, while Lan Jianxing belonged to the Solitary Sword sect. The Solitary Sword sect was one of the top sects in this sea region. There were only 2 sects that could be mentioned in the same breath as them. The first 50+ people who arrived were like frosted eggplants wilting. They only felt that the fortune before them had nothing to do with them. Lightning Devil Supremacy released his aura without restraint. It was as if a devil thunder had descended upon the world. Lan Jianxing was not afraid at all. A shocking sharpness emerged from his body like an invisible sword, shocking the world. The invisible yet powerful aura collided. The pressure was incomparably unbearable. The huge palace finally flew up from the bottom of the sea. Its full appearance was revealed to everyone's ears. Numerous blazing gazes fell on it, but soon after, their gazes dimmed. According to the current situation, they didn't seem to have any chance to enter the palace and seize the fortune. Since that was the case, no matter how good the fortune was, what did it have to do with them? The palace continued to fly up, and finally stopped 1,000 meters above the sea. 5 colored brilliance circulated, firmly protecting the palace. Everyone could feel that the power contained in the 5-colored brilliance wasn't something they could break. It was a power that had surpassed the Saint Realm. Even if Lan Jianxing and Lightning Devil Supremacy went all out, they didn't have the confidence to break through it. They could only wait for it to dissipate. The two of them stared at the palace with blazing eyes. As far as they knew, this palace was left behind by a peerless expert tens of thousands of years ago. There might be the inheritance of that peerless expert in it. If they could obtain the inheritance, they would have the chance to step into the ranks of the peerless experts, surpassing the Saint Realm. That's right. Lan Jianxing and Lightning Devil Supremacy's cultivation base had already reached their limit. There was no way for them to improve further. The next step was to break through their current realm and reach a higher level. It was a kind of metamorphosis, a metamorphosis of strength, a metamorphosis of the realm. Unfortunately, they didn't have the corresponding cultivation method, nor could they find the corresponding opportunity. They couldn't advance further. Right now, there was an opportunity. The others had also come here with the same thought. As long as they could obtain the inheritance in the palace, they would have the chance to step into the ranks of the peerless experts, becoming the pinnacle existence in this sea region. Above the palace, the boiling seawater gradually calmed down, returning to its previous tranquility like a mirror. At this moment, the calm sea surface rippled again. A black shadow appeared silently under the sea surface. Compared to the palace in the sky, no one noticed it. Suddenly, the black shadow rapidly became clear, gradually turning from black to red. The surrounding seawater also seemed to be dyed with a faint layer of red. Suddenly, a monstrous baleful aura erupted from under the seawater. As the huge figure soared into the sky, thousands of tons of seawater also soared into the sky, as if it was about to shatter the dome of heaven. Boom! 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 The deafening sound startled everyone. Even Lan Jianxing and the Thunder Devil Reverend were startled as they looked over. They saw a blood-red figure looming amidst the huge white waves that soared into the sky. The baleful aura it emitted was endless, and its ferocious might was earth-shattering. Thousands of tons of seawater fell with a loud rumbling sound. A terrifying storm swept out in all directions, causing the 50 over Saint Realm experts to tremble. They had to circulate their energy to stabilize themselves from being blown away. Although Lan Jianxing and Lightning Devil Supremacy didn't move, their faces were solemn. When all the seawater fell, countless waves rolled out, crashing in all directions. That huge blood-red figure also appeared before everyone's eyes. Instantly, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and their faces were filled with horror. It was 100 zhang long, and its entire body was blood-red. Its sawtooth emitted a chilling light, as if it could crush the heavens and earth with a single bite. Its huge eyes were filled with baleful aura and coldness. Its gaze seemed to contain hell itself. The fins on its back were like swords that could slice the sky apart. Blood Jade Emperor Shark! A Saint Realm expert exclaimed. It seemed to ignite the fear in everyone's heart, and it spread like a virus. You still recognize this, King. You're qualified to be my food. The gigantic, ferocious, blood-red shark rolled its eyes and immediately fixed them on the face of the person who had spoken. Its ferocious gaze caused the person's face to change drastically. All the blood drained from his face, and his entire body trembled. Cold sweat seeped out of his forehead, and his body went numb. Even his blood could not flow. No! A shriek rang out from his mouth, and his strength erupted in an instant. He turned into a ray of light and rapidly flew away. However, a strange scene appeared. That ray of light didn't fly away, but flew towards the 100 zhang long blood-red shark. The blood-red shark slightly opened its mouth, and the ray of light directly entered its mouth. A slight chewing sound was heard, and it made everyone's hair stand on end, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Eaten, that person was eaten just like that. One should know that that person had the strength of a middle 9-star Saint Realm expert, but he was like an ant in front of the blood-red shark. He didn't have the slightest strength to resist, and was easily killed. Lan Jianxing and Lightning Devil Supremacy's faces became extremely ugly, and traces of fear grew in their hearts. Chapter 1908. Ha 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 ha, delicious, delicious. Human flesh is indeed delicious. If only your body was a little stronger, it would be even more chewy. The 300-meter-long blood-red shark grinded its teeth as it let out a bone-chilling laugh. The other saint-level experts burst out with their full speed and retreated rapidly, creating a sufficient distance. Looking at the blood-red shark from afar, their eyes were filled with fear. The 100-zhang-long blood-red shark's body swayed. Layers of ripples spread out from its body. Its body was covered in a blood-red light. It had a jade-like texture. This was the origin of the blood jade emperor shark. The jade-like blood-red light covered its entire body. Shortly after, its 100-zhang-long body shrunk rapidly. In the end, the jade-like blood-red light seemed to have solidified, turning into a battle armor that clung tightly to its body. The blood jade emperor shark had turned into its human form, wearing a jade-like blood-red armor. There was a vivid image of a blood-red shark on it. In his human form, he looked extremely similar to a human. The only difference was that his hair was blood-red in color. It was long and flowed down, swaying without any wind. His face was filled with a malevolent coldness. His eyes were filled with a layer of blood-red luster. Wherever his gaze landed, it was as though he was staring at his prey, sending shivers down one's spine. His white teeth were sharp and shimmering with a cold gleam. It was even more chilling, as though one's flesh and bones were being torn apart. "Should I eat all of you?" Blood Jade Emperor Shark seemed to be talking to himself. "Forget it. Today, this palace is more important. Even if this palace was left behind by a human expert, the other races would also gain something from it. Moreover, it would weaken the strength of the human race to a certain extent. Why not?" The 50 saint-level experts all retreated far away, not daring to get close at all. They were afraid that they would become the Blood Jade Emperor Shark's food if they were to get close. Lan Jianxing and Lei Devil Reverend's faces were gloomy. They could completely determine the strength of this Blood Jade Emperor Shark. "Saint King Expert. Blood Jade Emperor Shark, you're already a king. This palace is useless to you," Lan Jianxing said. "Whether it's useful or not, it's not up to you to decide." Blood Jade Emperor Wang Sha glanced at Lan Jianxing. That gaze made Lan Jianxing shudder. His hair stood on end. "This palace is mine. If you want to die, come fight me." Regardless of whether it was Lan Jianxing or Lei Zun, both of them dreamt of becoming Saint Kings. That was why they had come here to fight for the treasures in this palace. But in front of the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark, the strength they were so proud of was nothing. They were like ants. They had almost gotten their hands on the opportunity, but they had missed it just like that. Moreover, it was right under their noses. They were naturally very unwilling, but there was nothing they could do. Everything was because of their strength. Wang Sha, the Blood Jade Emperor, was very proud of himself when he saw that he had intimidated so many humans. If it was possible, he obviously wanted to eat all the humans. Unfortunately, the Sea Realm had its own rules. Eating 1 or 2 people would be fine, but if he ate too many, it would definitely cause unnecessary trouble. The human saint rulers would not just sit by and watch. Although it was very arrogant, it knew that there were still some saint rulers who could kill it. However, its strength was enough to intimidate these humans, making them not dare to offend it. If they took the initiative to offend it, it would be even better. It would have an excuse to eat them all. The 5-colored luster on the palace gradually weakened. After a while, it would disappear without a trace. At that time, it would be able to enter the palace and take away all the treasures, not leaving anything for the human cultivators. It would indirectly weaken the human race's strength. At this moment, a sword light came from afar. When everyone sensed it, the sword light had already stopped and appeared not far from the palace. "Another Saint Realm human has come. Powerful blood chi fluctuations. It must be delicious to eat." Wang Sha, the Blood Jade Emperor, swept its scarlet tongue across its sharp teeth. Its eyes were full of greed. It fixed its gaze on the newcomer, as if it could not wait to devour him immediately. Feeling such a malicious gaze, Chu Mu turned his head and happened to meet the Blood Jade Emperor's eyes. The greed and bloodthirstiness were imprinted in his eyes. It made Chu Mu frown slightly, but there was no other discomfort. This made the Blood Jade Emperor, Wang Sha, a little surprised. However, the other party's aura fluctuations were obviously at the peak of the Saint Realm. Perhaps others could not sense it, but the Blood Jade Emperor was a mutant of the sea race. It had extraordinary senses. It firmly believed in its judgment. Looking away, Chu Mu looked at the palace. At this moment, the five-colored luster on the palace had become very weak. It was faintly discernible, as if it could disappear at any time. In a flash, Chu Mu quickly went to the palace. Since he had sensed the aura fluctuations and was attracted here, it meant that the palace was destined to be with him. It was a kind of opportunity. Perhaps it could help him improve his strength. In that case, he could not miss it. Courting death. The Blood Jade Emperor's face changed drastically. Not only was this human not afraid of him, he even dared to snatch the opportunity under his nose. He was courting death. In a rage, the Blood Jade Emperor immediately attacked. His palm slapped out fiercely. Instantly, the void condensed, and a blood-red palm print expanded in the wind, slapping towards Chu Mu. This attack suppressed the void, and a sound like a tsunami spread out. It made the scalps of experts like Lan Jianxing and the Thunder Devil Reverend tingle. They did not doubt that if such an attack was aimed at them, they would not have the slightest ability to resist. They would not even be able to dodge it. They would be slapped into a meat patty and die completely. Although they could not see the strength of this person, they had heard the Blood Jade Emperor's words. A peak Saint Realm expert was, at best, an existence on the same level as them. Damn it! Lan Jianxing gritted his teeth and gripped the sword in his hand tightly. Sword chi surged from his body. Even though he did not know the other party, no matter what, he belonged to the human race. As for the Blood Jade Emperor, he belonged to the foreign race. To watch one of his own race being killed by a foreign race without being able to do anything about it was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. The Thunder Devil Reverend's concept of race was not as strong as Lan Jianxing's. However, he felt uncomfortable as well, and his face turned ugly. All of this was sensed by Chu Mu. By the time the blood-red palm landed, it was already several feet in size. The terrifying pressure was like a blood-red mountain crashing down. Chu Mu stood in the void without any change in his expression. Only his long robe and long black hair fluttered under the wind pressure brought by the blood-red palm. Just as the blood-red palm was about to hit Chu Mu used one of his fingers like a sword and gently drew from the bottom to the top. A dazzling sword light made everyone close their eyes. When they opened their eyes again, the blood-red palm had been cut in half by the sword light. The two halves flew past the person on the left and right and bombarded the sea. With a loud explosion, countless waves rolled up. As for the seemingly small sword beam, it tore through the void and charged towards the Blood Jade Emperor, Wang Sha. "You're a Saint King expert of the human race." Blood Jade Emperor immediately screamed. This was beyond his expectations. Lan Jianxing, Lei Mozhen, and the others were also shocked. Soon after, joy appeared on their faces. A Saint King expert of the human race had appeared. Even if the opportunity in the palace was obtained by that person, it was still better than the Blood Jade Emperor. Since the Blood Jade Emperor wanted to kill him, Chu Mu would not just sit there and wait for his death. His right hand grasped the void and a dazzling silver light was emitted. The silver light spiritual sword immediately appeared in his hand, releasing a terrifying sharpness. His body flashed and he became one with the sword. In an instant, he crossed the barrier of time and space and turned into a silver star, piercing towards the Blood Jade Emperor's forehead. The shocking sharpness and speed made the Blood Jade Emperor's expression change drastically. He hurriedly retreated and waved his hands. A terrifying blood-red light shot out. He looked like he was going to fight with his life. However, Chu Mu's body was incomparably agile. He forcefully dodged the Blood Jade Emperor's counterattack. His sword was locked on the Blood Jade Emperor's forehead. There was no way to dodge. The blood-red armor on his body emitted a bright light. It surged upwards and gathered in the middle of his forehead, condensing into a bone armor. Chu Mu's sword also stabbed down at the same time, but it was blocked by the bone armor. At the same time, the Blood Jade Emperor Shark seized the opportunity. A blood-red bone spear appeared in his hands out of nowhere, and he ruthlessly stabbed towards Chu Mu. As the spear stabbed out, the void was split open. Blood-red ripples overlapped and rushed towards Chu Mu in an instant. The spear also missed. Chu Mu's real body appeared beside the Blood Jade Emperor Shark. The silver light spiritual sword slashed down. The incomparably sharp silver sword light silently cut through the void. Its sharpness was shocking, causing the Blood Jade Emperor Shark's pupils to shrink and his hair to stand on end. As soon as the two of them started fighting, Lan Jianxing and Lei Devil Venerable retreated in time to watch from afar. Seeing the power of their attacks and the soul-stirring power contained in each strike, they were extremely excited. This was the strength of Saint Rulers. Every single move they made contained great power. Especially Lan Jianxing. When he saw Chu Mu's sword, his eyes blazed. Sword chi surged from his body due to his excitement. A sword cultivator on the level of a Saint King expert. His sword skills were incomparably exquisite. With just a few glances, Lan Jianxing felt that it was incomparably profound. A feeling of returning to one's origin spontaneously arose. This time, even if I can't obtain the fortune in the palace, just watching this sword cultivator's battle will benefit me greatly. Lan Jianxing inwardly said, perhaps I can break through my limit because of this and increase my strength further. Although Lei Devil Venerable wasn't a sword cultivator, a battle of this level was still somewhat helpful to him. As long as he watched and memorized it, he would immediately enter seclusion to comprehend it after returning. It would definitely bring him great benefit. The two of them were excited, and the other human experts were naturally excited as well. A battle between Saint Kings was something that they might not be able to witness in their entire lives. Chapter 1909. Silver-colored sword light flickered in the void. Streaks after streaks of sword light were incomparably sharp. They were earth-shattering as they tore the void apart. Astonishing sword chi filled the entire area. Sword after sword, it continuously forced the Blood Jade Emperor Shark to retreat. With the blood-bone spear in hand, the Blood Jade Emperor Shark's face was ferocious as it constantly defended against Chu Mu's silver light spirit sword, looking for an opportunity to counterattack. At this time, the five-colored light above the palace had already disappeared. However, no one dared to fight for it. Their gazes were all attracted by the battle between Chu Mu and the Blood Jade Emperor Shark. In fact, even if someone wanted to fight for it, unless their strength was on par with Chu Mu and the Blood Jade Emperor Shark, they wouldn't be able to get close. Otherwise, they would be affected by the battle's aura and die. The silver light trembled and turned into countless rays, shooting toward the Blood Jade Emperor Shark. The Blood Jade Emperor Shark waved its spear, and the blood light rushed forward, shattering the sword light. Some of the sword light slashed its body, but it was blocked by the blood armor on its body. It didn't suffer any damage. The blood armor was formed from the Blood Jade Emperor Shark's incomparably tough skin mixed with highly concentrated energy. It was incomparably tough, and its defensive power was astonishing. Blood Sky Strike. With a low roar, the blood-bone spear spun, shattering Chu Mu's sword light. All the blood light condensed at the tip of the spear in an instant. With a sharp sound, the Blood Jade Emperor Shark and the spear seemed to have merged into one. A giant blood shark phantom appeared, and an earth-shattering power instantly bombarded Chu Mu. What a terrifying attack! How can this lord block it? Lan Jianxing and Lei Devil Reverend thought. The aura emitted by the blood sky strike made them feel suffocated. The slightest ripple would turn them into ashes. Even their yuan spirits wouldn't be able to escape. Dao beheading! The sword light was blazing as it slashed down from top to bottom. Regardless of whether it was tough or flexible, everything was severed. Under the sword light, the blood-red shark phantom was split in half, and it went straight for the blood jade Emperor King Shark. A crisp sound rang out as sound waves rippled outwards. Chu Mu's sword slashed down on the tip of the spear. A terrifying power erupted from the center. The two figures also seemed to be frozen in midair. It seemed as if they had been there for 1,000 years, but in the blink of an eye, they transformed into clouds and mist, closing in on each other and tearing at each other. The sword light crisscrossed and the spear startled the heavens. Chu Mu cultivated both the Yuan Power Way and the Divine Body Way, and he had reached the peak of the 9-star Saint grade. In particular, the Divine Body Way had reached the pinnacle of the 9-star Saint grade. With the unification of energy technique, the two powers were perfectly combined, and the power that Chu Mu could unleash was even more powerful. The Blood Jade Emperor King Shark was a mutated species of the Sea Clan. It was born with an incomparably powerful body, and the power that was contained in its body was extremely majestic. The combination of the two powers was its innate talent. Therefore, the power of each of its attacks was extremely shocking. Every strike of the spear was accompanied by a roar, as if the blood-red shark was biting with its mouth wide open. However, Chu Mu was able to shatter and suppress it time and time again. "Damned human, you have thoroughly angered me." With a roar, the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's body emitted a dense jade-like bloodlight, which was emitted from the armor on its body. Immediately, the jade-like blood light expanded rapidly, and a terrifying power erupted, repelling the void. Chu Mu could not get close, and could only retreat quickly. In the blink of an eye, the jade-like blood light spread out more than 100 feet. "Sir, be careful. The Blood Jade Emperor King Shark has revealed its true form." Lan Jianxing could not help but warn. In just a few breaths of time, the jade-like blood light settled down, and 100 feet long blood-red shark appeared before everyone's eyes. A monstrous, baleful aura swept out from its body like a storm, surging violently and wreaking havoc in all directions. With a roar, a terrifying sound wave was emitted from the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's mouth that was filled with sharp teeth. The formless sound wave seemed to have materialized and rushed out, shaking the void. Chu Mu was caught off guard and was directly hit. He felt as if his entire body had sunk into countless sharp blades, being crazily sliced, and his blood and qi surged violently. Energy erupted and condensed, resisting the impact of the formless sound wave. It lasted for a few breaths of time before stopping. The Blood Jade Emperor King Shark did not find it strange that the sound wave was ineffective. With a flick of its tail, it burst out with speed, and directly charged at Chu Mu. With a rumble, it was as if a magnificent army was charging forward. That kind of might was incomparably terrifying, and the void was directly repelled. The air in front of it was compressed at a high intensity, turning from formless to corporeal. Like a cannonball, it bombarded Chu Mu. Its terrifying might could easily shatter a bright Yang sword saint to pieces. Following that mass of air was the even more terrifying Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's body, as well as its open mouth, revealing its sharp teeth. One could imagine that such a charge could directly shatter a mountain. Once bitten, it would definitely shatter. The sword rose and the sword fell. Silver light slashed, and the mass of air was split apart. Shortly after, Chu Mu opened his left hand and grasped at the void. With a flash of light, the Eternal Spirit's sword appeared in his hand, and he slashed at the void. A loud explosion resounded, and the sound wave was boundless. Chu Mu's figure flew back, and the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's charge also paused slightly, stopping in the void. Dual swords. Lan Jianxing was startled. Shortly after, he thought of something and his eyes lit up. Among sword cultivators, there were a few who could use dual sword. However, the true art of dual swords had always been a legend. Dual swords were not just wielding two swords. It involved a lot of profoundness. However, he didn't know if this lord before him had grasped the legendary dual swords art. Soon, he found out. With dual swords in hand, Chu Mu's strength multiplied, and he immediately unleashed a berserk attack. Dual swords could display completely different sword arts, and they could also complement each other, greatly increasing the might of the sword arts. All kinds of profoundness could be unleashed. After the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark returned to its original form, its strength increased sharply, and its strength became even more tyrannical. However, due to the increase in size, its agility was inferior to Chu Mu's. Chu Mu's afterimages revolved around the 300-meter-long Blood Jade Emperor King Shark, launching attack. However, the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's skin was incomparably tough, possessing astonishing defensive power. Moreover, it could absorb external forces to a certain extent, weakening the offensive power and protecting itself. This kind of talent really made people envious. It swung its tail fiercely, slapping the void, causing the void to explode. As a mutant of the Sea Tribe, the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's bloodline was extraordinary. Although its level was only equivalent to a human at the beginning stage of the first refinement, its strength had reached the peak of the first refinement. Its vitality was so strong that it had even reached the second refinement. Without the attacking power of the second refinement, it was impossible to cause any real damage to the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark. After the battle, the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark was sure that the human in front of it was only at the first refinement. Therefore, it was not afraid and even wanted to kill and eat him. Not only was the flesh and blood of a peerless expert more delicious, but it would also increase its strength to a certain extent. Heaven and earth cross/. Under the dazzling sword light, it cut through the void and imprinted on the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's body. It left a cross mark on the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's skin, but it was still unable to tear it apart. Ha 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 ha, peerless human, with your strength, it is impossible to break my defense. The Blood Jade Emperor King Shark laughed maniacally. Sword realm change. With a low roar, the power of the two swords suddenly increased by 4 times. Heaven and earth cross/. An even more dazzling sword light tore through the void and imprinted on the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's body. This time, it tore its skin apart and cut deeply into its body. The pain caused the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's body to tremble, and its eyes were filled with blood. Damned peerless human, how dare you hurt me, I want you dead! Under the roar, a terrifying murderous aura surged into the sky. As the blood-red color spread, the seawater below surged violently. It was pulled up and lifted the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark up. The seawater was also dyed blood-red. Blood sea overflowing sky. The blood-red sea roared incessantly, and countless blood-red waves slammed heavily. Every wave seemed to have the power to shatter the heavens. It was endless, and all of them charged towards Chu Mu. Within every wave, there was a faint shadow of a giant blood-red shark, causing the power of the waves to multiply. Blood sea overflowing sky. It was the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark's ultimate move. It had once used this move to force back a peerless human who had reached the early stage of the second refinement. It could be seen how terrifying its power was. Blood prison burning sky. Sword God's descent. Without hesitation, Chu Mu used his secret technique. Although the heaven and earth cross/ under the sword realm change could hurt the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark, it was only a slight injury. The blood-red flame burned and jumped on the surface of his body. His strength was strengthened by 7 to 8 times. The power of the Sword God's Descent secret technique gathered on the two swords, and the sharpness was strengthened by 10 times. He raised his sword up high, as if it was connected to the heavens. Thunder clouds appeared, and lightning flashed back and forth. Traces of frightening majesty condensed. With a cracking sound, it was as if a bolt of lightning had descended from the heavens. It carried the aura of judgment and struck Chu Mu's sword. In that breath, the lightning illuminated Chu Mu's body. He stood tall in the sky, as if he had been imprinted on the earth by the sword god. Therefore, everyone raised their heads to look at that figure. It was like an eternity. No matter how much time had passed, they would never forget it. It would still be so clear. The blood-red color in the blood-jade Emperor King Shark's eyes faded. From the depths of its heart, it could not help but feel fear. The figure in front of it was like a god, making it feel fear. The aura of the lightning made it feel fear. Taking a deep breath, it was like the sound of a windbach. Between the heavens and the earth, there was an invisible storm that blew past. It made everyone's body sway unconsciously. No matter how high or low their cultivation was, no matter how strong or weak they were, they could not stabilize themselves. As if it had sensed that something terrifying was about to happen, the blood-jade Emperor King Shark's huge eyes were filled with fear. Before it could say anything, Chu Mu had already opened his mouth. The 3 words were like the voice of the heavens. Great heaven's might. Sword style. Chapter 1910. Lan Jianxing, Lay Devil Reverend and the others stared blankly ahead. That person had already entered the palace, and the ferocious blood-jade Emperor Shark was nowhere to be seen. The sea of blood fell back to the ground, returning to its original azure color. Only the remnant aura in the air was still telling of the intense battle that took place not long ago. Through Lan Jianxing's eyes, they could still see the scene that took place earlier. The sea of blood was filled with endless waves. Above each wave, there was the shadow of a giant shark. Riding the wind and breaking the waves, all of them rushed towards Chu Mu. That might was enough to shatter the mountains, shatter the earth, and shatter the sky. Suddenly, the figure in front of the blood-red waves was covered in blood-red flames. The sharpness of his long sword increased sharply, and he pointed it towards the sky. Thunderclouds gathered and lightning filled the air. A mighty heavenly might appeared, and in the end, a shocking thunderbolt struck down, striking the longsword. The heavens and earth were in harmony, and the heavens and man were one. In that instant, the figure seemed to have existed since the beginning of time, turning into an eternal imprint that was deeply engraved in their minds, never to be forgotten. The 5 words resonated with the heavens, reverberating through the void. It was like a great drum that cleansed the depths of everyone's soul. Great heavenly might sword style. A sword that received the power of the heavens and earth slashed down. The sword light was indescribable. With just a sword, it split the endless waves of blood apart, shattering the shadow of the giant shark on the waves, and slashed towards the blood-jade Emperor Shark. Without any obstruction, the blood-jade Emperor Shark's incomparably strong body didn't have the slightest bit of resistance under that stunning sword light. It was slashed into 2, and its 100-zhang long body was directly split into 2. Large amounts of blood splashed out, but it didn't fall to the ground. Instead, it gathered towards Chu Mu, condensing into a blood-red pill in his palm. As for the blood-jade Emperor Shark's corpse, it fell into Chu Mu's hands and was kept into his spatial ring. After that, Chu Mu entered the palace. Stepping into the palace, Chu Mu did not encounter any obstacles, nor did he gain anything. He went straight to the deepest part of the palace. In the deepest part of the palace, there was a huge golden chair with dragon carvings. On the golden chair sat a figure in a purple-gold robe. He was tall and had a condensed aura, like a mountain or an abyss. Even so, Chu Mu could sense that this person was already dead. What was left behind was only a body. Perhaps there was even a bit of an image left behind. Sure enough, when Chu Mu approached a certain range, the body's dim eyes suddenly lit up, and an ethereal voice sounded. "I don't care who you are. The fact that you're able to enter this place means that you're fated with me. You can obtain my inheritance." The drifting voice was somewhat deep. As soon as he finished speaking, his eyes lit up and shot 2 beams of divine light at Chu Mu. Chu Mu's figure flashed. He had experienced many things, so he was even more cautious when facing such things. He would not easily let the divine light enter his spiritual world because it could be a trap, an attempt to occupy his primordial spirit and take over his body. Although he did not let the two beams of divine light enter his spiritual world, Chu Mu had other ways to obtain the so-called inheritance. He guided the two beams of divine light with one hand and easily sealed them into an empty inheritance jade. It seems that there shouldn't be any traps, Chu Mu thought to himself. If that person still had a trace of consciousness hidden in the divine light to attempt to take over his body, this time, Chu Mu would definitely not be able to guide the divine light into the inheritance jade. After that, Chu Mu's spiritual power swept across the corpse, starting from the head and disappearing bit by bit. Not long after, it completely disappeared between heaven and earth, leaving nothing behind. Other than that, there was nothing else in the palace. Chu Mu could not help but feel disappointed. He did not care about the so-called inheritance. Relatively speaking, what he wanted more was a treasure that could immediately increase his strength. Unfortunately, there was none. I hope this inheritance is useful to me. Muttering to himself, Chu Mu's spiritual power probed into the inheritance jade. Not long after, cracks appeared on the inheritance jade, and it shattered, indicating that the inheritance had been obtained by Chu Mu. However, he did not feel happy about obtaining the inheritance because the so-called inheritance was a cultivation method. This cultivation method was a cultivation method that used the yuan qi of a peak 9-star saint to refine the laws. Once the refinement was completed, one could step into the level of a supreme expert and become a true supreme expert. However, this belonged to cultivators who had comprehended the laws. Chu Mu was not one of them. He had comprehended the true intent. If I have enough time, I can carefully ponder over this cultivation method and slowly modify it until it is suitable for me. However, it will take at least a few decades or even a few hundred years. What I lack now is time. Chu Mu thought to himself. He had a premonition that in these few years, there would definitely be a great war that was related to him. Therefore, a few decades was an extravagant hope. What a pity! After finding nothing else, Chu Mu turned around and walked out of the palace. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu's figure appeared outside the palace. The palace seemed to have lost its support and fell down with a loud bang. Its speed was getting faster and faster. Like a meteorite, it crashed heavily into the sea. A terrifying sound was heard. It was as if a 10,000-ton boulder had crashed into the sea. The sea was forcefully split open and countless waves roared in all directions. Countless white waves rushed up to a height of a few hundred meters and submerged the palace. In the eyes of everyone, the palace gradually sank into the sea under the countless white waves. After a while, the palace completely disappeared and sank back into the sea. The turbulent sea also returned to its original state. An opportunity had come to an end. For them, it had not even begun yet. In their hearts, they could not help but feel disappointed. However, on second thought, being able to witness a battle between two peerless experts was also a kind of opportunity. They could go back and comprehend it well. Perhaps they could gain something. Coming out of their disappointment, this group of people all looked at Chu Mu with blazing eyes. That sword that killed the Blood Jade Emperor, Wang Sha, had endless power. It was as if it had existed for eternity and would never be forgotten. Chu Mu glanced at them. He knew that this group of people had come for the opportunity of the palace. However, in the end, the opportunity was obtained by him. In the end, even if he did not obtain it, these people would not be able to obtain it, because the Blood Jade Emperor, Wang Sha, was not a powerful existence that they could compete with. If you want the opportunity, I will give you a chance, Chu Mu suddenly said. He opened his 5 fingers and grabbed downwards. Suddenly, a stream of seawater rushed up to the sky and quickly condensed under Chu Mu's palm. It was the blessing of his sword will and sword qi. Finally, it condensed into a deep blue sword. The sword continued to absorb the seawater. Strands of seawater entered it and slowly grew and expanded. Finally, it turned into a sword steel that was 10 meters tall. It was deep blue and seemed to contain endless mysteries. It stood in the void for thousands of meters, motionless, as if it had become one with the space. This sword steel contains the cultivation method of law that was passed down from the palace. It also contains a part of my understanding of the way of the sword. Whoever can comprehend it will have the opportunity. Chumu said slowly, "It is not enough. There are only 100 chances." The so-called 100 chances meant that one could only comprehend it 100 times. After 100 times, the sword steel would dissipate on its own. It was a sudden inspiration. Chumu's casual action had planted the seed of prosperity for the human cultivators in this sea area. After erecting the sword steel, Chumu was about to leave. "Senior, please wait a moment," Lan Jianxing said subconsciously, although he wasn't sure why he had spoken. "What is it?" Chumu looked at him. Lan Jianxing had a sudden inspiration and immediately said, "Junior is Lan Jianxing, the third sword throne of the solitary sword sect. I would like to thank you for your assistance, Senior. Please come to the solitary sword sect. The entire sect will definitely welcome you with open arms." Lan Jianxing's attitude was very sincere. Chumu muttered to himself. He had never been to this part of the sea, and wasn't familiar with it. He had never heard of the solitary sword sect either. The 4 seas were vast, and he didn't know which way to return to the Heaven Dragon realm. Perhaps he would have to find a way from the people in this part of the sea. "In that case, I'll go to the solitary sword sect," Chumu said. Lan Jianxing almost thought he had misheard. When he called out to Chumu, it was only out of impulse. What he said afterwards was a flash of inspiration. He didn't have any extravagant hopes that this senior would be willing to go to the solitary sword sect. Unexpectedly, he agreed. Chumu's sword had left a deep impression on Lan Jianxing. It was to the point that he had developed a sincere heart, a heart that yearned for the Tao of the sword. "Lead the way," Chumu said with a smile. This Lan Jianxing didn't look young, but he had a kind of sincerity towards the Tao of the sword. As long as such a person didn't die halfway, as long as he obtained some opportunities, he would be able to rise up and soar into the sky. In terms of age, Lan Jianxing might be much older than Chumu, but in terms of the Tao of the sword, Chumu surpassed him by a lot. In the world of cultivators, age was secondary. It was often based on cultivation base. Therefore, Chumu didn't find it strange at all to be called senior. Lan Jianxing immediately led the way, bringing Chumu in the direction of the solitary sword sect. Lightning Devil Reverend looked at Chumu's back, and his eyes flickered. He seemed to be hesitating about something. Then, he turned to look at the deep blue sword steel floating in the void. Clenching his teeth, he made a decision. He turned and appeared in front of the sword steel, and began to comprehend it. The others also came to the sword steel to comprehend it, as there were only 100 chances. Chumu didn't say anything. Lan Jianxing didn't say anything, even though he wasn't happy. Lightning Devil Reverend's face flashed with pride. With their flying speed, they saw an island after a few hours. "Senior, that's the island where the solitary sword sect is located," Lan Jianxing said. Chapter 1911. This sea region was called the Sky Blue Sea region, and it spanned hundreds of thousands of miles. Within the Sky Blue Sea region, there were 3 clans: the Human Clan, the Sea Clan, and the Sea Beast Clan. Each of them occupied an area, and there were differences in strength, but the differences were not too great. Among them, the Human Clan was the weakest, but neither the Sea Clan nor the Sea Beast Clan would easily start a war against the Human Clan. This was because, although they were stronger, they did not have an overwhelming advantage. Once a war broke out, they would be able to destroy the Human Clan, but they would also suffer heavy losses. It was like sacrificing 800 men to kill 1,000 enemies. As for the possibility of the Sea Clan and the Sea Beast Clan joining forces against the Human Clan, it was also very unlikely. This was because the Sea Clan and the Sea Beast Clan were not of the same clan, but two different clans. Those who were not of the same clan had different intentions. The three clans kept each other in check. This way, they were able to exist and develop continuously for many years. However, resources were limited, so after many years, the strength of the three clans had reached a certain level, and it was difficult for them to improve further. Among the Human Clan was led by the Sage Kinghall. This Sage Kinghall was an organization formed by the peerless experts of the Human Clan. Under the Sage Kinghall were the three major sects: the Ancient Yuan sect, the Solitary Sword sect, and the Tripod sect. The three major sects each had a main island, and each controlled many islands. The island where the Solitary Sword sect was located was called the Thousand Swords Island. On this island, only the Solitary Sword sect existed. The palaces were located on the Thousand Swords Island, and they looked like giant swords that pointed to the sky. If one looked down from above, they could see that all the palaces were connected, forming the shape of a giant sword. Greetings, Senior. In the Solitary Sword sect's main hall, the 5 people from the first sword throne to the 5th sword throne stood in a row. Their movements were orderly, and they saluted Chu Mu with 3 swords. The 5 of them were the 5 sword thrones of the Solitary Sword sect. They were the strongest in the Solitary Sword sect, and they were famous in this sea region. The 5 sword thrones were like brothers. Therefore, the 3rd sword throne was saved by Chu Mu to a certain extent, and the other 4 thrones were very grateful. Moreover, Chu Mu was a peerless expert, an expert who was above them. He was at the same level as the Saint Kings of the Sage Kinghall, so he was worthy of their respect. No need to be so courteous. Inwardly, Chu Mu sighed in amazement. Based on his cultivation base, it was only natural that he could see the uniqueness of the Solitary Sword sect's 5 sword bases. They all had special constitutions. Unfortunately, the 5 spirits of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were not complete. Or rather, they were not strong enough. Otherwise, with such special constitutions, even if they did not have a suitable cultivation method to temper the laws, as long as they were given some time, they would definitely be able to become peerless powerhouses. Unfortunately, none of their special constitutions were complete. However, if they could obtain a cultivation method to temper the laws, they would definitely become a peerless expert. Even if they had a suitable cultivation method to temper the laws and sufficient resources, not everyone could become a peerless expert. The probability was less than 30%. This cultivation technique is a gift to you. Chu Mu waved his hand, and 5 pieces of inheritance jade flew out. What was recorded in them was the cultivation method to temper the laws that he obtained from the palace. It was fate that brought them together. Moreover, Chu Mu had a good impression of the Solitary Sword sect's 5 sword bases. Moreover, as long as they had the chance, they would be able to become peerless experts. Moreover, Chu Mu would not lose anything by doing this. The 5 sword bases each caught a piece of inheritance jade. After probing it with their spiritual energy, they received the inheritance. Immediately, they were extremely excited. Thank you, Senior. The 5 sword bases were extremely excited. With this cultivation method, it would not be long before the 5 of them would be able to surpass their current cultivation base and reach a higher level. They would become peerless experts and become saint rulers. It should be known that if the 5 of them joined forces to set up the 5 spirits and 1 sword formation, they would have the strength to contend against ordinary peerless experts. If they all became peerless experts and set up the 5 spirits and 1 sword formation together, perhaps they would have the strength to contend against second refinement peerless experts. And the one who had given them this opportunity was the Senior in front of them. The grace of creation. Let me ask you, do you know which direction can lead to the deep blue world? Chu Mu asked. Since he already knew that this was a sea that spanned hundreds of thousands of miles, he understood that this place was far away from the deep blue world's land. It was located in the middle of the sea. The sea was vast and boundless. Unless one was a saint emperor expert, one would be able to cover the entire sea with their consciousness and not get lost. Otherwise, even a fifth refinement peerless expert would very likely get lost in the vast sea. Senior, we do not know which direction to head to the deep blue world. The first sword base said, however, the saint rulers in the Saint Ruler Hall might know. Second question. In this sea, where is there a treasure that can quickly replenish and refine one's origin energy to the extreme? Chu-Mu asked again. Senior, there is a secret location in the solitary sword sect called the 10,000 Swords Realm. Once you enter it, you will be pierced by 10,000 swords. In a short period of time, your body will be tempered to the pinnacle. The first sword base immediately said, however, there is a restriction in the myriad sword realm. Only sword cultivators can receive the piercing of 10,000 sword. I wonder if your sect will allow me to enter the myriad sword realm? Chu-Mu immediately asked. He did not get the answer he wanted for the first question, but he did get an idea. The second question was solved. Now, he just had to wait for the solitary sword sect's answer. Senior, it is our sect's honor to enter the myriad sword realm. The first sword base immediately said, when will you enter the myriad sword realm? The sooner the better. Chu-Mu said. In that case, the 5 of us will immediately open the myriad sword realm for you. Senior, please follow us. The first sword base said. The other 4 sword bases quickly left the main hall and headed towards the myriad sword island. That was the forbidden area of the solitary sword sect. Only the 5 sword bases could enter. The function of the myriad sword realm was to have 10,000 swords piercing one's body. Senior was already a peerless expert. They did not know what to do in the myriad sword realm. However, they were indebted to Senior. No matter what request he made, they would not refuse, let alone just enter the myriad sword realm. Given Senior's cultivation base, he surpassed them by leaps and bounds. Perhaps there was a reason for that. The solitary sword sect's 5 sword thrones stood in 5 different positions. In the middle of them was an altar with a circumference of 10 meters. The surface of the altar was covered with countless veined patterns, each of which seemed to emanate sword chi. Each of the 5 corners of the altar had a strange magical symbol. The symbols were different in color and shape, and they emanated different auras. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth. The hands of the 5 sword bases formed different hand seals. They let out low roars, and as the sound vibrated, 5 different colored lights rose up from the hand seals formed by the 5 sword bases. The golden handprint was like an incomparably sharp sword, the green handprint was like a green tree brimming with vitality, the blue handprint was like a flowing river, the red handprint was like a ball of raging flames, and the brown handprint was like a thick and solid piece of land. The altar contained the power of the sword, as well as the power of the 5 elements. It was a unique treasure. The 5 sword bases had special constitutions that corresponded to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. They were also sword cultivators. With all these factors combined, they were qualified to activate the altar and open the myriad swords realm. In other words, the conditions to open the altar were quite harsh. Even if someone else obtained it, they might not be able to open it. Furthermore, the altar was already here when they discovered it. It was impossible to move it away. The light from the 5 handprints fell and entered the pentagonal runes on the altar. The 5 runes lit up and released a completely different light. Immediately, the sword chi on the altar seemed to have been activated. Upon closer inspection, one would find that there were exactly 10,000 sword chi. The 10,000 sword chi wandered and finally gathered at the center. In the sky, it was as if a sword had cut through the void and a spatial door opened. Chu-Mu already knew that he could enter the myriad swords realm through the spatial door. Without any hesitation, he took a step forward. As if he had traveled through time, he instantly entered the spatial door and disappeared. The 5 sword bases stopped but did not leave. Instead, they sat down cross-legged at the 5 corners of the altar and recovered their strength. The Myriad Swords Island was the main island of the Solitary Sword sect. It was a forbidden area of the Solitary Sword sect, and had an extremely strong defensive force. Even a first refined expert would find it difficult to enter. It was very safe. After the 5 sword bases recovered their strength, they immediately began to comprehend the cultivation method that Chu Mu had given them. After comprehending it, they began to use their sword origin to refine their own power of laws. Their sword origin had reached the true limit a long time ago. Their strength was at the peak of the Bright Moon realm, and they were very powerful. Moreover, because of their special physiques, they had a deeper understanding of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Their power was stronger than ordinary power of laws. This time, they focused on the power of laws that they were most proficient in. This was because it was the easiest refinement. This step was the first step to becoming a peerless expert. It was very important. Once the refinement was completed, they would be half a step away from becoming a peerless expert. Their strength would be even more powerful, and they would have opened the path to becoming a peerless expert. The reason why many people could not become a peerless expert was because they could not take that first step. However, for many people it was like a natural chasm. For the 5 sword bases it was nothing. Soon they successfully entered the refinement of the first type of power of laws. However, it would take some time for them to complete the refinement. Only they knew about this. The outside world did not know that 5 future peerless experts were about to appear. At the same time, Chu Mu also passed through the spatial door and entered the so-called Myriad Swords realm. Chapter 1912. The Myriad Swords realm looked like a gray and misty place. The sky and the earth were all gray and misty in all directions. It was as if they were inside a giant egg, or as if it was a world that had yet to be formed. What surprised Chu Mu was that the heaven-earth yuan qi within the Myriad Sword realm was extremely dense, as if it was about to turn into liquid. Furthermore, it was astonishingly pure. When he had just entered, there was already pure heaven-earth yuan qi that automatically poured into his body, quickly transforming into divine desolate sword essence. Chu Mu could clearly feel that the divine desolate sword essence in his body had increased by quite a bit. He flew to the center of the Myriad Sword realm and activated the divine desolate sword art. Immediately, as if a dam had been opened, it poured out and poured into Chu Mu's body. The speed was shocking. Outside his body, countless heaven-earth yuan qi had turned into liquid, like a long river that surged, surrounding Chu Mu's body. A buzzing sound suddenly sounded out, and vaguely, there seemed to be 10,000 swords appearing in the Myriad Sword realm. Sword light filled the air, layer upon layer, surrounding Chu Mu in the center. Every sword was emitting a cold light, reflecting Chu Mu's figure. The astonishing sword intent locked onto Chu Mu. The 10,000 swords seemed to form a large array. Suddenly, every sword trembled slightly, and began to revolve. Streaks of astonishing sword chi shot out from the swords, like countless little dragons. As they meandered, they all shot towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu remembered what the 5-sword throne had said. Sword chi piercing through the body was an excellent method to refine yuan qi, but the body would have to bear some pain. Chu Mu did not hesitate, allowing the 10,000 streaks of sword chi to shoot towards him, shooting into his body. In that instant, he felt what was called some pain. It was as if 10,000 swords had pierced into his body. The pain could not be described with words. However, Chu Mu was already mentally prepared, and his willpower had reached an astonishing level. He forcefully endured it, and did not make a single sound. However, his face turned pale in an instant, and his body could not help but tremble. 10,000 streaks of incomparably sharp sword chi entered his body, and immediately, they quickly swam within Chu Mu's meridians. The sword chi split into front and back, endless. As it shuttled back and forth, it displayed an astonishing sharpness. Chu Mu's divine desolate sword essence was actually being torn apart time and time again. And under this constant tearing and shattering, the impurities within the sword essence were constantly being expelled, becoming increasingly pure. After being purified, the divine desolate sword essence became even more condensed, and naturally, there would be some empty space. Immediately, heaven and earth yuan qi rapidly flowed in, filling up the empty space, and was once again refined by the sword qi. 10,000 streaks of sword qi continued to flow through his meridians, and Chu Mu had to bear the intense pain. However, although his face was pale, and his body was trembling uncontrollably, he did not cry out because of the pain. His eyes became brighter, and within them, there seemed to be a sword light flashing. In the sky-blue sea region, in the territory of the sea race, on a lone island, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly erupted. The aura was ferocious, and it was scarlet in color. When the wind blew, one could smell the thick and nauseating smell of blood from far away. In the blink of an eye, the scarlet aura was like a blood cloud hovering in the sky, covering an area of 100 miles. It constantly surged, as if a terrifying demon was being nurtured within. "Who is it? Who killed my bloodline?" A roar filled with killing intent resounded through the void, shaking the surroundings. As the blood cloud churned, its ferocious aura overflowed, as if doomsday had arrived. All the living beings within 1,000 miles were trembling. The blood shark ancestor is angry. What is it that has made the ancestor so angry? Could it be that something has happened to the ancestor's only son? All sorts of guesses were discussed. Immediately, 3 streaks of blood-red light broke through the air from the lone island, and flew far away. They were under the orders of the Blood Shark ancestor to leave Blood Shark Island to investigate who had killed the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark. Once they found out, what awaited them would be the fury of the Blood Shark ancestor. However, the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark had a special relationship. He would always wander between the territories of the sea race and the sea beast race, and sometimes run to the human race's territory. The entire sea region was hundreds of thousands of miles wide. Therefore, without any definite information, it would not be easy to investigate the whereabouts of the Blood Jade Emperor King Shark and the cause of his death. The Blood Shark ancestor seemed to be aware of this. Therefore, after his anger, the blood cloud above Blood Shark Island dissipated, turning back into a scarlet aura that sank down. Everything returned to normal. In the blink of an eye, time flew by. A month had passed. The myriad sword island was peaceful and unaffected. The rulers of the solitary sword sect, the 5 sword seats, were still in the forbidden area, sitting cross-legged at the 5 corners of the altar, operating their cultivation methods to refine the power of law that they were most proficient in. Even though their special physiques were not complete, it allowed their tempering to go very smoothly. Their speed was dozens of times faster than other cultivators. In just a short month, it was as if other cultivators had been tempering for several years. In their spiritual worlds, it could be seen that the power of laws that they were proficient in was gradually condensing under the tempering, showing signs of turning into runes. When the law turned into law runes, it meant that the refinement was complete. At that time, they would have 1 foot in the door of peerless powerhouses, and their strength would increase significantly. Based on the current situation, it seemed that it would not take them too long to complete the first law rune. Perhaps it would only take them less than a month. The 5 sword seats were very excited, but they suppressed it and returned to their calm. Every single one of them had been stuck at the limit level for at least a few decades. They had tried all sorts of methods, but were unable to break through. Today, their wish of a few decades was about to come true. To Chu Mu, who had given them this hope, they were grateful from the bottom of their hearts. Merely opening Myriad's sword realm wasn't enough to express their gratitude. However, The most important thing now was to do their best to cultivate and strive to become peerless powerhouses as soon as possible. Within the myriad sword realm, Chu Mu, who had endured 10,000 rays of sword chi for a month, seemed to have become numb. The intense pain could no longer affect his mind. After continuously being ravaged by 10,000 rays of sword chi for a month, the effects were very obvious. Chu Mu's sword yuan was constantly purified, replenished, and replenished. Now, he had reached the final step. Once this step was completed, Chu Mu immediately reached the limit of his yuan qi. At that time, he would spend some more time to master it, and he would be even more powerful. Perhaps he would be able to surpass the first refinement. Between peerless powerhouses, the difference in every refinement was very obvious. Even within the same refinement, the difference in levels was also very obvious. One day later, Chu Mu's body suddenly trembled. The divine desolate sword chi in his dantian had reached the limit and could no longer contain any more. Furthermore, the purity of the divine desolate sword chi had also reached the limit and could no longer be purified. This meant that Chu Mu's cultivation of yuan qi had finally reached the limit of yuan qi and the limit of the sage body. When the two combined, the power that could erupt was incomparably terrifying. Just when Chu Mu thought that the refinement was over, the 10,000 rays of sword chi unexpectedly left Chu Mu's body and gathered above him like an ocean of sword light. Terrifying rays of light were released and locked onto Chu Mu, causing his scalp to turn numb. Immediately after, the first ray of sword chi shot down from the sky. Its speed was indescribably fast, and Chu Mu had no time to dodge. The sword chi pierced through his head and entered his body, heading straight for his dantian. In an instant, Chu Mu's body felt like it was being torn apart. That kind of pain made him, who had been accustomed to 10,000 rays of sword chi for a month and a day, feel unbearable. That ray of sword chi instantly entered Chu Mu's dantian and directly melted, merging into Chu Mu's dantian and becoming one with the divine desolate sword chi. Chu Mu seemed to understand something. When the sword chi entered the body and merged with the sword chi, it could increase the sharpness of the sword chi and increase the power of the sword chi. The first use of the myriad sword realm was to refine the sword chi to the extreme. The second use was to merge the sword chi into the body and the sword chi, increasing the sharpness of the sword chi and increasing the power of the sword chi. However, the 5 sword thrones only knew the first use because their level of sword Dao had not reached the point where they could trigger the second use of the myriad sword realm. Chu Mu had reached it, so he guided the sword chi into his body and merged it with the divine desolate sword chi. After understanding this point, Chu Mu was immediately overjoyed. He guarded his mind and welcomed the second ray of sword chi. Everyone had a limit. After reaching the limit, if one tried to withstand it forcefully, it would only harm one's body. In serious cases, one's body would be torn apart by the sword chi, and even one's primordial spirit would not be spared. Everyone's limit was different. This limit was closely related to the endurance of one's body, the capacity of one's dantian, the endurance of one's sword chi and one's willpower. Chu Mu's sacred body had reached the limit of 9th grade, so his endurance was naturally astonishing. His dantian had undergone a mutation and was 10 times the size of an ordinary cultivator of the same level, so there was no need to talk about its capacity. The divine desolate sword chi was cultivated from the extremely high-level divine desolate sword art, so it was very high-end. Finally, his willpower also surpassed countless people. With the combination of the dead, Chu Mu's resistance to the sword aura entering his body had reached an astonishing level. Ray after ray of sword chi entered Chu Mu's body from the top of his head and quickly entered his dantian. They split open and merged into his dantian and merged into the divine desolate sword chi. In the blink of an eye, dozens of sword chi had entered Chu Mu's body. However, Chu Mu had not reached his limit and could continue to withstand even more sword chi. Chapter 1913. This altar was actually owned by a powerful sword sect in ancient times. The ancient sword sect used this altar as a cultivation mystic realm for the disciples of the sect. Only those important disciples who were talented enough and had made sufficient contributions to the sect were qualified to enter and receive thousands of swords piercing through their bodies. In an extremely short period of time, they could complete the extreme tempering of their yuan power, allowing it to reach the true peak. Other than that, this altar was also a secret checkpoint to investigate the deeper level of talent of these important disciples. The sword sect was naturally made up of sword cultivators. This altar and the myriad sword realm within the altar only served sword cultivators. Only those who had reached a sufficient level in the way of the sword could trigger the second function of the altar. And in the ancient sword sect, disciples who could trigger the second function of the myriad sword realm would be further valued and included in the ranks of the seed disciples of the sect. They would be heavily nurtured because they would become the pillars of the sword sect. However, for these seed disciples, even if they triggered the second function of the myriad sword realm, they would only be able to contain a few dozen sword chi. To be able to contain more than 100 sword chi, they would be considered above average among the seed disciples. Since ancient times, the ancient sword sect had stood tall for hundreds of thousands of years. The most outstanding record was just over 900 sword chi. It was said to be unprecedented and would never be surpassed in the future. It was impossible to say how many years had passed since the ancient sword sect disappeared. The altar they had left behind, as well as the 10,000 swords realm, had been acquired by the solitary sword sect. They had become a secret location that only the 5 sword thrones could open. In the myriad sword realm, Chu-Mu, who had triggered the second effect of the sword aura entering his body, continuously received beam after beam of sword aura. Every time a sword aura entered his body, he felt as if his body was being ripped apart. The pain was indescribable. As more and more sword chi entered his dantian and fused into the divine wilderness sword essence, Chu-Mu could clearly feel that the sharpness of the divine wilderness sword essence was becoming more and more shocking. The sword essence of a sword cultivator was originally known for its sharpness. That was the most basic attribute. The other attributes, such as extreme speed, agility, etc., were all obtained from different cultivation technique. Any attribute of the sword origin that was strengthened could increase the power of the sword origin. After a period of time, more than 300 strands of sword chi had fused into Chu-Mu's body. In the era of the ancient sword sect, this was a level that only an extremely small number of outstanding seed disciples could reach. Usually, only one would appear every few thousand years. However, this was not Chu-Mu's limit. He could continue to absorb even more sword chi. Soon, the number of sword chi exceeded 400. The limit was not reached yet. Absorb, 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 continuously strengthen, and in the outside world, the law runes in the 5 swords throne's spiritual world were getting closer and closer to forming. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. Chu-Mu had already absorbed 500 rays of sword chi. The continuous flow of sword chi into his body and into the sword origin in his dantian was like eating something. A lot of food had been forcefully stuffed into his mouth. His stomach was wriggling intensely to digest it. Although he could do it, it was a very difficult feeling. I still haven't reached my limit. Give me more. Chu-Mu muttered to himself. He wanted to accommodate even more sword chi because he knew that the more sword chi he accommodated, the more astonishing the sharpness of his divine wilderness sword origin would be. It would also be more powerful, and it would bring unimaginable benefits to the increase of his strength. Originally, he only planned to refine his yuan power to the extreme. But now, it seemed that not only could he refine his yuan power to the extreme, he could also further increase the power of the divine wilderness sword origin. This was an opportunity that could not be missed. 600 strands. The sword qi increased one by one, constantly fusing. 700 strands. 800 strands. 900 strands. At the level of 900 strands, Chu Mu began to have a feeling that he was about to reach his limit. To be able to accommodate 900 strands of sword qi, even in the ancient sword sect, this was a heaven-defying monster that only appeared once in hundreds of thousands of years. 910 strands. 920 strands. The accommodation of every strand of sword qi was a challenge. I'm about to reach my limit, Chu Mu muttered to himself. He could clearly feel it himself. Very quickly, the number of strands of sword qi he accommodated reached 990 strands. It had already surpassed the highest record of the ancient sword sect. Have I reached my limit? Deep within his dantian, there was a swelling feeling. No, I haven't reached my true limit. I can still continue accommodating. 991 strands. 992 strands. The speed at which the sword qi entered his dantian did not change. However, Chu Mu felt that it would take a long time to accommodate every strand of sword qi, as if it consumed a lot of energy. 993 strands. 994 strands. 999 strands. Chu Mu finally felt that he had reached his limit. His dantian and the divine wilderness sword origin emitted a feeling of fullness that could no longer be accommodated. However, Chu Mu's feeling told him that if he accommodated one more strand and reached 1,000 strands, there would be an even more obvious improvement. It was as if he had broken through his limit. Should I take the risk and accommodate the last strand of sword qi? Chu Mu pondered. If he did not want it, he could now reject the strand of sword qi that fell from the sky into his body. This was something that could be done after he began accommodating the first strand of sword qi. I did not get to where I am today by luck. Everything that I have done is based on my own ability. After experiencing many life and death situations, I have finally survived until now. My enemy is extremely powerful. I need to be even more powerful in order to be able to contend against him. I want to integrate the last strand of sword qi. With an incomparably firm determination, Chu Mu's will was unprecedentedly firm. It was as if he was about to break through his limit. The 1,000th strand of sword qi entered Chu Mu's body from the top of his head without any obstruction. His body felt as if it was being torn apart once again. The sword qi rushed straight into his dantian and entered it. Immediately, Chu Mu felt his body swell, and there was a tearing pain. It was as if his dantian had exceeded the limit that it could accommodate because of the sword qi that had entered his dantian. It was like a balloon. If the air that was blown in exceeded the limit that it could accommodate, it would explode. Hold on, I must hold on. Blue veins bulged on Chu Mu's forehead. His strong willpower directly affected his dantian. Cracks began to appear on his dantian and spread out. The sword qi was also continuously integrating into his dantian. Now, it was up to whether the sword qi would be integrated first or his dantian would shatter first. This was a gamble, but it was not a gamble that had no chance of winning. It could be said that the chance of winning was 50-50. In addition to Chu Mu's strong willpower, the instantaneous explosion of his dantian's dantian increased his chances of winning to 70%. With a 70% chance of winning, there was no reason not to take the gamble. Kacha kacha. Chu Mu seemed to hear the sound of his dantian shattering. The cracks spread and almost covered his entire dantian. The sword qi had completely integrated into his dantian. Success. Chu Mu breathed a sigh of relief, feeling as if he had just survived a calamity. However, another sword qi descended from above, causing his scalp to go numb. Once this sword qi entered his body, his dantian would definitely shatter. When that happened, even if he didn't die, his dantian would be destroyed, and he would only have the Tao of the sage body left. His strength would immediately plummet. Stop. As if by command, the sword qi stopped just before it touched the top of Chu Mu's head. Chu Mu felt his scalp go numb. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. With a thought, Chu Mu left the 10,000 Swords realm. His dantian was on the verge of shattering. Although the cracks were currently disappearing, it would still take a few hours. If he didn't leave the 10,000 Swords realm, and some other unforeseen event occurred, then his future would be buried. As for whether or not there would be other opportunities in the future, who knew? After appearing, Chu Mu stood directly on top of the altar. Around him were the 5 sword thrones of the solitary sword sect. Sensing the fluctuations, they all woke up from their cultivation. "Senior, you've come out. Did you gain anything?" The third sword thrones hurriedly bowed and asked. "Yes, I've gained a lot. Myriad Sword Realm doesn't only have the one effect you mentioned." Chu Mu nodded his head as he spoke, and simply explained the second effect. The 5 sword thrones were pleasantly surprised. This meant that one day, when their sword Tao became more profound, they could enter the 10,000 Swords realm again and trigger the second effect. Thus, their strength would increase without any increase in their cultivation. "Thank you for telling us." The 5 sword thrones were overjoyed. If Chu Mu hadn't told them, perhaps they wouldn't have found out. "The 10,000 Swords realm belongs to you. Telling you is nothing," Chu Mu said. "I'm going to cultivate in seclusion for a period of time. After that, I'll need you to tell me how to get to the Sage King Hall." "Senior, please." The 5 sword thrones hurriedly arranged a quiet room for Chu Mu so that Chu Mu could cultivate in seclusion. Chu Mu's seclusion was firstly to recover his dantian. Secondly, it was to familiarize himself with the divine wilderness sword essence that had reached its limit and merged with 1,000 sword cheese. Such a powerful force had to be mastered in order to unleash its full power. A day later, his dantian had completely recovered. After exceeding the limit of accommodation, the recovered dantian's degree of stability had increased. As for Chu Mu, he had completely grasped the brand new divine desolate sword energy. This speed was completely out of his expectations. He originally thought that he would need at least a dozen days to do so. He never expected that in the process of accommodating the sword energy, he was already constantly familiarizing himself with it. "Senior, you've come out. Where's the Sage King Hall?" Chu Mu asked. "Senior, the Sage King Hall is a little far from the solitary sword sect. Why don't I lead the way?" The third sword thrones walked out and said. Among the 5 sword thrones, he had the most direct impression of Chu Mu. "Sorry to trouble you," Chu Mu said. "Senior, please don't say that. It's my honor to be of service to you," the third sword thrones quickly said. "Third brother, please don't make any mistakes," the first sword throne said. With the third sword thrones leading the way, Chu Mu left the 10,000 Swords island of the solitary sword sect and flew towards the Sage King Hall. Chapter 1914. Above the Saint level and below the Great Emperor level, there was a realm known as the Peerless Realm. In the deep blue world, they were peerless experts. In the land of exile, they were kings. Above the sea, they were saint kings. From the solitary sword sect to the Saint King Hall, it took the two of them half a day to arrive. "Senior, that is the Sage King Hall," the third sword throne said as he pointed to a large hall that was suspended in the air and surrounded by white clouds. The King's Sage Hall was a floating palace that was 999 meters above the sea. It was 99 meters tall and was entirely black with golden edges. It had an ancient elegance to it. The floating hall was a unique treasure. It had a strong defensive power and could withstand the attack of a Saint King. The Saint King Hall looked big and could easily accommodate thousands of people. However, in the sky blue sea territory there were only a dozen Saint Kings. At the entrance of the Saint King Palace, there were 2 black-clothed people standing there. They didn't move at all, as if they were 2 statues. However, Chu Mu could feel the weak aura coming from them. These were 2 human cultivators. Moreover, their cultivation had reached the peak of the 9-star saint rank. Their strength was comparable to a dark star sword saint. However, their identities were merely Saint King Palace guards. Most of the time, the guards of the Saint King Hall were comparable to the leaders of the three major forces. "Sir, I am the third sword throne of the solitary sword sect. I have brought a senior here to ask the Saint Kings." The third sword throne flew over and spoke to the two guards. Hearing that the other party was the third sword throne of the solitary sword sect, the two guards didn't dare to be negligent. After all, the solitary sword sect was one of the three great powers of the human clan in this region of the sea. The fifth sword throne was filled with peak 9-star experts, and they were extremely powerful. It could be said that they had status and power, and were second only to Saint Kings. Soon after, they looked at Chu Mu. They felt that Chu Mu was even younger than the solitary sword sect's third sword throne, and were somewhat bewildered. However, the solitary sword sect's third sword throne didn't need to make fun of them. "Please wait for a moment, I'll go and report this." One of the guards cupped his hands and quickly turned to enter the main hall of the King's Sage Hall. Not long after, the guard appeared again. "The two of you, the 8th Saint King invites you in," the guard said. He stepped aside, allowing Chu Mu and the other to enter. From the entrance to the main hall there was a corridor that was about 100 meters long. Soon, Chu Mu and the third sword throne entered the hall. As soon as he entered the main hall, he felt his vision darken. It was as if he had gone from day to night. A powerful aura descended from the sky, suppressing him. The third sword throne's expression suddenly changed. The feeling of suddenly entering the darkness and facing the pressure of a powerful aura made him feel extremely uncomfortable. He could not bear it, and with a grunt, he was about to be crushed. It wasn't that his willpower wasn't strong enough, but the difference in strength was too obvious. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. No matter how strong one's willpower was, there would always be a limit. At this time, the third sword throne only felt that he was surrounded by a force. That force helped him resist the terrifying aura descending from the sky, weakening it to the point where he could bear it. "Oh, so it really is a Saint King level elite." A voice sounded, and the darkness disappeared in an instant. The terrifying aura dissipated as well, as if everything before was just an illusion. The main hall appeared before Chu Mu and the third sword throne's eyes. The simple layout of the main hall was very simple, but it contained a unique charm. It was a charm that was close to the way. It made people feel comfortable just by looking at it. In the main hall, there were a total of 15 seats. With one seat as the center, there were 7 seats on each side. Before they came, the third sword throne had already told Chu Mu that there were 15 thrones in the King's Sage Hall. These were the 15 thrones. Among them, on the last throne on the left, sat an old man in black. His eyes were dark and deep. It was as if he was the one who created the darkness and released the aura to suppress it. He wanted to test Chu Mu's strength. The result of the test showed that Chu Mu was also a Saint King level elite. Perhaps his strength was not below his. "I am the 8th throne of the King's Sage Hall. You can call me 8th Saint King." The old man in black on the 8th throne stood up and said with a smile, "How should I address you?" "Chu Mu." Chu Mu said lightly. "Sir Chu Mu, are you not a cultivator from the Azure Sea territory?" 8th Saint King asked again. "That's right. I am from the deep blue continent. Due to some reasons, I came to the Azure Sea territory by accident. I want to go back. I heard that the King Sage of the King Sage Hall might know the route to the deep blue continent. Hence, I came to visit you." Chu Mu explained the purpose of his visit to the King Sage Hall clearly to avoid guessing. "I see. The King Sage Hall does have a map to the deep blue continent." 8th Saint King nodded and said, "Although this map is not very valuable, it was left behind by the seniors of the King Sage Hall. Normally, outsiders are not allowed to see it." "Sir 8th Saint King, what price do I have to pay?" Chu Mu asked directly. Normally, outsiders would not be allowed to see it. This was not absolute. However, Chu Mu was prepared before he came. Hence, as long as the other party's request was not excessive, he would agree to it. He would get the map as soon as possible and rush back to the deep blue continent. Sir Chu-mu, what do you think of the human tribe in the Azure Sea territory? 8th Saint King asked. This question seemed to be irrelevant. I have only been here for a short period of time. I do not have much contact with the human tribe. Hence, I do not have any opinions. Chu-mu replied. This was the truth. That's true. However, no matter what, Sir Chu-mu is still a member of the human tribe. 8th Saint King pondered and said, when the King Sage Hall was at its peak, we had a total of 15 King Sages. We dominated the Azure Sea territory. We were on par with the Sea Tribe and the Sea Beast clan. However, 100 years ago, 2 King Sages were assassinated. This caused the strength of the King Sage Hall to decrease. In terms of top combat power, we were pulled apart from the Sea Tribe and the Sea Beast clan. At that time, there was no evidence to prove who did it. However, the spearhead pointed to the Sea Tribe's ancestor Blood Shark and the Sea Beast clan's Sea King. However, there was insufficient evidence. The Sea Tribe and the Sea Beast clan were very strong. The human tribe could not seek justice at all. 8th Saint King's words were filled with anger. Out of the 15 King Sages, 2 of them had been assassinated. Their strength had obviously decreased. Most importantly, although they knew who the murderer was, they did not have direct evidence. Without evidence, they could not identify the murderer. The Sea Tribe and the Sea Beast clan could completely deny it. 8th Saint King, if you have anything to say, just say it. Chu-mu said. All right. Sir Chu-mu, I would like to invite you to join the King Sage Hall. 8th Saint King took a deep breath and said in a solemn tone. Join the King Sage Hall? Chu-mu did not know that 8th Saint King had such thoughts. However, he still said, Thank you, 8th Saint King, for your attention. However, I am not a cultivator of the Azure Sea region. I will return to the Azure continent. I will not stay here. I understand. However, Sir Chu-mu is a King Sage elite. If you are willing to become the King Sage of the King Sage Hall, even if it is only in name, you will be able to strengthen the human tribe and intimidate the Sea Tribe and the Sea Beast clan. 8th Saint King said solemnly. If that is the case, then I will join the King Sage Hall. Chu-mu said. Speaking of which, it was just a formality. It was not a bad thing. Moreover, he was also part of the human tribe. It was only right for him to contribute to the survival of the human tribe. All right. Haha. Our King Sage Hall has a new King Sage elite. 8th Saint King was overjoyed. Sir Chu-mu, the 2 King Sages who died back then were the 11th Saint King and the 15th Saint King. Their thrones have been preserved. Which throne would you like to choose? As he said that, he seemed to be afraid that Chu-mu did not understand. He explained again, in the King Sage Hall, other than the first Saint King, the ranking of the other King Sages has nothing to do with their strength. It is basically based on the order in which they entered the King Sage Hall. I will choose the 15th throne, Chu-mu said. This ranking did not mean much to him. Although 8th Saint King said that the ranking had nothing to do with one's strength, if he chose the 11th throne, perhaps the King Sages below the 11th throne would not feel good. All right. Now I will address you as the 15th Saint King. 8th Saint King laughed and said, After 100 years, the King Sage Hall has a new King Sage. It is a blessing for the human tribe of the Azure Sea region. This is a big matter. I will go and inform the other King Sages to come here. 8th Saint King did things swiftly and decisively. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and quickly disappeared. Not long after, he reappeared again. This time, he had already sent out a notice. 15th Saint King, please wait for a moment. The other King Sages will be here soon, 8th Saint King said. However, just as he finished speaking, a terrifying aura suddenly rushed in from outside. It was the aura of a King Sage, and it was filled with murderous intent. They are here so soon? 8th Saint King was stunned. He immediately reacted. This aura did not belong to any of the King Sages in the King Sage Hall. It was more like, "The murderer who dared to kill my descendant, get out here." A shocking roar was heard, and a monstrous murderous intent surged. 15th Saint King, I will go and see who dares to cause trouble in the King Sage Hall. As soon as 8th Saint King finished speaking, his figure flashed and appeared outside the hall. Chu Mu and the third sword throne also left the hall and went outside. What entered his eyes was a huge blood cloud that covered an area of 100 miles. Monstrous blood aura surged out from the blood cloud and rushed in all directions. Under the blood cloud, a blood-red figure stood in the air. His aura was incomparably terrifying.